The Strange Motion Way podcast, brought to you by Royal Purple Synthetic Oils.
Royal Purple premium synthetic motor oils and high-performance chemicals have been designed to improve performance in all conditions and provide cleaner operation, better mileage, and decreased oil change frequency. That means less oil changes. With products available for your gasoline and diesel engines, Royal Purple is the obvious choice for your performance needs. Drive with Royal Purple, the synthetic expert. Welcome to another episode of the Strange Motion Way podcast. I'm your host, Tim Strange, along with...
Gimpy Strange.
We got a little hop-along Carrie, broke her foot, it seems like, at King of the Hammers, so she's got a walking boot. Our regular listeners know we have two cats that make appearance. Our young cat, the 1-year-old Axel, is scared of your boot. He does not like it.
He's scared to death of it.
So tonight's guest, we have a little lead-in here. Journalist, photographer, and editor of such epic titles as Rod Action, Hot Rod, and Good Guys Gazette. He's been part of what I call the heyday of the automotive magazine industry. That's kind of passed a little bit, the heyday of the magazine industry. He, along with Rob Canan, drove Cadzilla across the country, photographed, and wrote an article for Hot Rod magazine. I have that right here. I have little props. This is one of the big keys of the people that helped us get to where we are today. Wouldn't you say?
100%.
Not only from the press he gave us, but introducing us to super awesome people that we have friends still today, industry connections, word of advice, pep talks when we needed it, and just being a great friend to both Carrie and I. We have stayed in touch since he has left the industry. We'll still talk from time to time, and it seems like we have this weird connection. One time he called me out of the blue and asked me how I was doing. Probably had not talked in 6 months. He goes, I just got up today and felt that I needed to call my friend Tim. That was the day after my mom passed away. And once before, again, he called me when he was back in Illinois, when my dad was in the hospital. He just has this connection. I need to check on a friend. Welcome, the legendary and great friend of ours, Steve Anderson.
Well, thank you, Tim. That was all very, very nice. And yes, there's a connection, and we've been very lucky to have that, aside from the rest of the things we've been able to do in the industry. So yeah, thank you for having me.
So
welcome to everybody.
There's all kinds of stuff. We think this one might have a chance of getting split up in a couple parts, like Zane
Very
and
possible.
Gene Winfield or Daryl Starbird. The other night, as we were getting ready to pre-talk about some of this, we talked for 45 minutes. I don't know if you realize that, getting ready for the podcast. Talk. So we're going to get to all the meat and the bones. So let's go back to little Steve, how he got into cars and decided, hey, I want to do this for a living, or did you just fall into it? So little Steve, how did you get introduced to the world of hot rods?
Well, thank you, Tim. It's pretty amazing path. I couldn't go back and relive it in any other way and have it come out the same. My folks were extremely supportive. When I was 7, my sister passed away, and I was pretty lost. And they put a hot rod magazine in front of me, and that caught my interest. And that's what I started reading. And every article, I remember every ad, everything like many of us have. And then along the way, my folks put plenty of time and energy into promoting my interest in cars. We went through years of slot car racing. It happened that Magoo, the car builder at that time, owned Riggin Slot Car Company, and his sons and I would go slot car racing a lot, so that brought along that side of things.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt from time to time here, because that's
Please.
what we talked about this the other night, and a lot of you guys, hot rod historians, you know Magoo, and you know the name, or you should. He has since passed away. I did not know till the other night talking to you that Magoo had a slot car company.
He did. It was the prefab leader, I would think, at the time in their mid-60s, called Riggin, R-I-G-G-E-N. And it was pretty amazing. I still have my slot car box here in the living room, and with their decals on it. And it was just a great bunch of access. It was something my dad and I loved to do. We didn't have a lot of money, so my dad would paint bodies, and then they would sell them at the track, and we'd get track time. And so being connected with Magoo's led to a few cars. Generally, I still have my own stuff. And they would bring home things that were exciting. I remember one summer Dave, his younger son, and I were bored, and he had brought home a box, a 12 by 12 by 12 box of motors that were 26Ds that were bad. They didn't make RPM right. So we hooked them to a 24-volt transformer and proceeded to fry every one of them, every evil we could do with those motors. I remember Dick came in one night after work, and he opens the door to Dave's room, and it's just full of electrical smoke. I mean, a really healthy environment. It was so much fun. But back to the bigger picture. My mom worked at the local Sears store in the personnel department one day after I got home from elementary school. This was in '64, so I was 11. And she said, go see Mr. Kelly in the automotive department. Sitting in the automotive center in the little glass room that had some big doors where they could roll cars in and out was a Cheetah, Bill Thomas, one of the original few Cheetahs.
Wow.
And we opened the doors. I climbed in. Mr. Kelly fired the car up, and we went out and drove up and down the half-mile-long parking lot at speed. And I don't know if he'd ever driven anything fast before. And it had white wall Allstate tires on it. And it was crazy because I couldn't see anything but sky. I was sitting in a moon bucket with your back up against the rear axle, how it was or is in most cars. But I was so small that I couldn't see anything but sky and the noise. But it made a huge, huge impact. We used to go out shooting in the Mojave Desert near Edwards Air Force Base and Willow Springs Raceway. But I had no clue of that. I think Dad did, but he didn't say anything. He used to go hunting out there before I was born. And we heard this noise, so we quit shooting, put the guns away, and then drove over down this dirt road to the edge of what turned out to be Willow Springs Raceway. And who was there but Shelby and the Ford group, and they were testing the first prototype Mark I Ford GT.
Oh, wow.
White with black hood. And we stood up on the left side of the track above, up at the big corner up there, and watched many laps. And then they'd go in, and we'd just stand there waiting, and we'd go back out again. And there were a bunch of people. I'm sure after watching the movie Ford versus Ferrari that was the moment that they talk about in that film. And it was so impacting that just led to everything else. More stock cars and more drag racing. And we'd go to Lyons back then and Irwindale and out to Riverside to see racing there a lot of times. I remember watching Gurney win a stock car race, I think it was at Riverside. And so I was steeped in anything that was automotive. And lucky enough that Dick Magoo, or Magugorac, Megugorac, he was Yugoslavian and a wonderful guy, extremely talented, and every car he ever built is still running out there. And he reached out to me one day. He came home with a 27 Model T coupe. And Lois, his wife, came out and said, Dick, you drive roadsters. He had a car called Barney, a little 29, which for a big guy, he was that. 29s were small, but he always loved them. And he looks at me and he said, you need a hot rod. Here's this T coupe stock, mint on a trailer. And I bought it for $1,200, $600 for the body, and $600.
So that was your very first car.
That was my first car.
You were how old at that time?
13.
So we've had a lot of stories of people. This is our 51st or 52nd recorded? 51st. And everybody has stories of their first car. And they might have got it from a local whatever guy. But you're the first one that got their very first car from a hot rod legend. That's pretty cool right from the start that you had that connection with Magoo.
As I said, I couldn't have planned anything any differently, any better. It was amazing. And he sold the chassis out from underneath their famous cover car, a black and red Touring 27 named Annabelle, which Lois had upholstered, and it was spectacular. Everything they did was the best because they required that of themselves. And he sold me the chassis for $600, 327 Power Glide, 39 Ford rear end, and 49 Ford rear end, I think it was actually. And I redid the chassis, tore it all down to the bare, and then I decided to turn my attention to the body. Well, My dad said it's original. The paint is immaculate, which was DuPont Duco, the first lacquer. And no, I had to get a red block and sand all that paint off. It took me 3 months, all summer. I had really large forearms, and of course, when it was finished, what color did it become? Black. Should have left that. Knowing what I know today, I wish I'd have left that vintage paint on there because that's part of the story. But so it is with hot rodding. So, funny enough, I'd lost interest by 17, and I sold the car to a guy with a chrome shop, I think, Bob Barnes. And Bob, I'm getting everybody right after these many years, he painted the car, did the upholstery, and the rest was history. And it became the cover car in 1975 for Rod Action magazine. Little did I know that, 12 years later, I would go to work for that magazine because of Dick Magoo. So that was through Brian Brennan, of course.
Okay, so before we move on to that,
Please.
Your dad's taking you to all this stuff. Did your dad have any hot rods, or was he just a fan of hot rods? Did he have any cool things, a big block Impala or anything like that?
I have pictures of him when he was young with his buddies. This is post-war, and he had a 36 coupe, and he had it. They were all at Malibu wearing their straw hats, being very cool. There were no houses in the hills above Malibu then, none to burn, none at all. It was empty. Nobody lived there yet. And here was his 36, but he had taken the strips along the hood vents on the side and turned them into a V, kind of the hot rod V that we see around V8s today. And that was the only thing about the car. He was not a car guy per se. We probably had 10 tools in the garage, which he could do just about anything with. He was very capable. He was a gunsmith in the war, and something I always missed out on. I never learned a thing about building guns, and that was his specialty. He was a marksman. And we loved guns in our house for the right reasons. And but he just wanted me to see and live everything that other kids maybe couldn't, especially having gone through the loss of our family. And so my mom took me to Art Center College of Design, which is where many of the great designers today studied. And that's a whole separate story. But I was in the groove already. I didn't have any interest in school. I was very poor at school. I drew more drawings on my book covers than read the books. And it's kind of funny that I ended up in publishing with such a poor record in that academic.
See, I blame guys like him for my solid C average in school because I was supposed to be paying attention, and I was reading stuff like this in the back of the class, and so yeah, you entertained me a lot while I was supposed to be paying attention in school.
Yeah, it was good times, and I was just blessed. My folks never raised their voice, never raised a hand at me. They were just very loving, welcomed my friends into our home, and we had many, many, many experiences over the years, and it led to a life I couldn't have imagined.
So, what was your very first job? Did you have a high school job?
Yeah, we came home from Mammoth. We've been fishing up in the Sierras, and there was a phone on a message machine back then from Mr. Greenberg, who was the manager of the Lowe's Theater in Woodland Hills. And I got a job as a doorman with a tuxedo and my own bow tie. It was very good looking.
How old were you then?
16.
Okay.
11th grade. And so I was a doorman, and then worked that job for quite a while. Made my way to assistant manager at 19 or something, and then moved on. I remember my first go at the parking lot with a friend's Volkswagen. We did some donuts out in front of the theater after hours one night. Rolled his car, so then had to put a new Volkswagen body on it, Beetle, and that led me to have one. But my first car was my T, and then yes, a '67 VW Beetle, which had some cool tires, but I had to have it because of the tires. I remember on the way home from buying it from a guy, the engine blew up. Now, it had one set of pistons on one side, another set on the other side. It was the biggest conglomeration of junk. And we went back through it, got it all right, and somebody stole it. But I was able to roll that insurance money into a 70, very early 70. I think the serial number was 1900 something, 240Z.
Hmm.
And that was my first foray into the sports car world, which is to this day what I love most. Sorry, hot rodders. I love hot rodding, but when you do it for a living, it stops being your hobby. And sports cars have always been like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so built that car up. Other friends had them, and living right at the doorway to all of the canyons leading out to Malibu and the beaches of the Santa Monica Mountains, Mulholland, and every other road. That became a nightly thing. We knocked down 50 miles a night road racing those roads when there was nobody living there either. And of course, we never broke the law. We were always within the speed limit.
Of course.
Our side of the road.
Yeah.
Very safe.
You don't have to lie. The statute of limitations have worn out by now. You know, you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one night driving my mom in a 307 70 Camaro and a Jag, friend Brad McCabe, who's a stunt driver today in Hollywood. He worked on Ford versus Ferrari.
Hmm.
And we were friends then. And we're buzzing through Mulholland, heading back to the valley. And here comes an XKE Jag, and he was all over us. But he tried to get around us, and he ended up in the dirt doing 360s almost off a cliff. And that was probably the last time he ever tried that. But those canyons were a godsend because it taught me how to drive.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into journalism and would go to events, I won many of those driving events amongst journalists, at least, because of the years I'd spent behind the wheel in those canyons. And my parents actually promoted it. I'd drive their cars. I remember the first time Dad came home with a second or third company car, and it was a GS 455 Stage 1 Buick. And he was going to buy a Rivi or a Sabre, and I said, "No, Dad, you have to get it." Being the cool dad he was, that's the car he brought home. To show my respect and love for him, I immediately went out by my high school at 100 miles an hour in a brand new car with no understanding of what to do. And when I got home, I parked it, went into my room. He comes over to the window of my room and taps it and says, "Come out here for a second. I want to show you something." I walked up to the car, and it's just reeking of brake dust and heat. And he said, "You smell that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know what that is the smell of? Speed. And you're not going to drive this car for 6 months."
Oh.
That was the last day that happened. That's the way he dealt out justice, was take something away.
Mm-hmm.
So, not the most respectful son at the time, but we laughed it off later.
So,
yeah.
As you touch base on this, there's a lot of other journalists and photographers that also were into sports cars and SCCA racing. And I forget, I was on the Power Tour one year, and somebody that worked for Hot Rod wanted to drive my. Oh no, it was David Featherston from Australia. He liked to road rallying, like, I don't know what they were calling it then, but autocross now. And he told me what he was going to do to the car, and I'm like, no. I mean, it was a new car that we built for GM for the SEMA show, and I was like, I can't have you smoke. He goes, "If I smoke the transmission, it's all on you." And I was like, I don't think you're going to drive this car. But Brian Brennan is a vet guy. We've had him on the podcast. And so as we jump around a little bit, it's guys like you that were interested in aggressive driving. I think that was the spark that lit it for how big autocross is now, the hot rod power tours, because obviously you guys could give ideas on stuff and, fastest streetcar shootouts and all that type of stuff. And they have Popular Hot Rodding used to do that, where you would do a drag race and autocross and all that stuff. So
I remember that. Yes.
Hats off to guys like you that weren't just, "Hey, I'm going to put my Pro Street car in the trailer and be a trailer queen." You guys were always pushing for that to, hey, drive these things. That's what they're made for.
Well, to that end, and a shout out to Jeff Smith, who was very helpful. Cam Benty gave me my first gig at Carcraft, but immediately I went over to Hot Rod. It was Jeff that made that possible. And Jeff is quite the driver for a Chevelle El Camino guy.
Mm-hmm.
He knew how to lay down laps. We had a chance to compete a couple of times at press functions. But it was while I was at Hot Rod, and probably didn't drive my own car for 5 years, that I at Peters. Drove everything else when the Viper was a prototype, when the ZR1 was a prototype. Jeff and I drove one of those over in the proving ground in Mesa, Arizona, before it was production. And you had a lot of access. And so you go down to the parking lot downstairs, 8490 Sunset Boulevard building in La Cienega. And the parking lot was all kinds of vehicles. They had a rear Morrison powered Pro Stock pickup down there that I took home one night. I took 3/4 of a tank to go 60 miles.
Okay, I'm going to stop you again and back you up a little bit, because as we're getting into the hot rod stuff, there's a lot of stories working for there. I want to go back a little bit. How long did you work for Rod Action? I've been sorting through. I have a huge magazine collection, and of course, I just can't sort them. I got to thumb through a little bit when I and like I see your name in a lot, because I'm one of them. When I read a magazine, I read the magazine. So not only was it cool to meet Roy Brizio in person the first time, but it was
absolutely
to meet Steve Anderson and Steve Canan. And I have a funny story. The first time I ever met Gray Baskerville, he cussed me out.
That's great.
Indy we were supposed to get shot for hot rod, and I went up and I was like, man, where are they shooting the cars? Because whenever we got shots before, it was at the Street Machine Nationals. They'd all go to one section of the fairgrounds, and how the blankety blank am I supposed to know? You're interrupting my. He's like, sorry, and I was like, oh, that was Gray Baskerville. Nice to meet you, sir.
That's great. He was like that.
How long were you at, what year did you start at Rod Action, and how long were you there?
Very end of 82, and I left in 88. Brian was there for probably a year or so, year and a half maybe initially, and then he moved on. And so I couldn't spell editor
was
yet.
It Straightwater before, right?
Yes, yeah, I think he was. Yes.
And then he came to Rod Action.
And then he founded Rod Action with Tex Smith and some other people, but that Tex was integral in that beginning.
Yeah, very good magazine collector like I am. Some people forget about Rod Action on how good a magazine that was. I mean, all the heavy hitter cars was in. It's funny, small world. I was thumbing through one day, and I was like, man, I always loved this turquoise Pro Street 40 Ford Coupe with a blower motor with like a shaker scoop. Of course, that's how, the brushed wheels. And I read it, like, it was built by Gary Case. I remember the car, but I never met Gary back there. Well, now he's involved in running. He's the logistics. He's the guy that runs the Triple Crown, and Bobby Alloway's the spokesperson. That's what I say. And I've kind of forgot how many badass cars Gary Case built. But
I remember the car you're talking about. I could see the brushed wheels on it. It was very electric blue.
Yeah.
And, it seemed like I had yellow and green buildings in the background. That's the crazy part. I can't remember yesterday, but I remember every car I ever shot.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was, not having been a journalism major or school guy at all, when Brian left, and he was very helpful in the beginning, for giving me a chance with zero credentials, and then entrusting it to me, giving me more and more pieces. My first cover shot was David Lee Roth's convertible 4-door 50 Merc with red with white scallops, and that was the first cover shot. And then when Brian left, it was on my shoulders. I didn't have anybody else on staff, so I had to travel.
How did you want to do that? What was the spark to have Brian Brennan give you the shot? What, like you said, you didn't have any schooling in it. You just like, oh, I just want to be around cars. How does that happen? Now you probably got to have like a master's degree to even have a shot at working at something like that. I don't know.
Well, I think the late Pat Ganall, I think he had a master's degree. I think Pat Ganall was one of the better educated guys in the industry. He was, as are a lot of people.
His son Bill is very well educated too. Yeah.
So I worked in a photo studio. I was just the pickup guy. I would pick up cables and roll them and do tear downs and things. And my good friend to this day, Scott Colleen, was the chief shooter there at Mike Thompson Studios, and he and Mike did some amazing things over. We did rock and roll equipment and aerospace and all kinds of dental photography that I wasn't part of. And I was never a major there. I was always the help guy. And then the job went away. And Magoo called me one day and he said, you know how to write? I said, I can do it. He said, go see Brian Brennan. And Brian asked me one question, which I always thought was funny and telling. He said, how do you spell vinyl? I said, DINYL. He goes, you're hired. Nobody gets that. So it's always funny what lands the job. It isn't the
You get that right?
application.
You'd spell vinyl wrong, wouldn't you?
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I did. I don't know. Anyway, and so, we were off and running. I remember, if you talk about, I'm sure Brian scratched his head of why did I hire this man? My first job was to visit a guy named Bob Sparborough, who was a fabricator in the Bay Area. One of the first guys to make machined billet wheels. He told me that he was the first before anybody. But that all comes down to calendars, dates.
Yeah, I forgot about that name until I was looking through some of them old rod actions, and he had an ad in there. The same time as when the Boyd and Little John stuff started coming out.
With his touring car in the ad, red and black touring car.
Mm-hmm.
And he built incredible cars. A couple of cars that I shot of his were way ahead of their time, decades ahead of their time. Well, I got in traffic. I didn't plan ahead, and I missed the flight going to the Bay Area from Burbank.
Oh,
My first flight. How did that look? Had to call him up, reschedule. Everything worked out fine. Every time I ever flew again, and that's thousands of times, I was 2 or 3 hours early. I never got there late. So again, Magoo's got me over there. I took the job, and I was running scared a long time. Another person that was pivotal, both in my understanding of the creative side, which I was always creative in one form or another, but not in this venue, was Dennis Adler, Adler. Dennis was the ad guy for Challenge Publications and also did his own books. He's also done some of the best books, hardcover books ever, coffee table books ever written on Mercedes and other brands. Mm. An exceptional writer, exceptional person. And he's opened the door to so many different vehicles, opportunities. Instead of him taking them, he sent me. I got to go on I think it was the 84 Corvette when they didn't have an 83 Corvette. And it was the ultimate ride and drive. I got to drive a Countach. I was hit in a Lotus Esprit Turbo on that trip while we were parked. Dennis Adler enabled that. It was the best trip probably I've ever had. I got Jim Ingle was with me, Mr. Corvette, in the passenger seat of the Countach, going up Mount Palomar in San Diego. What an experience. But that was Dennis Adler. He opened the doors so many times because he'd done it all. He's known at Pebble Beach. He was incredible. He lives in the East South Pennsylvania, I think. But I wanted to put a shout out to him because he was as pivotal as Brian was in that company. And for the years after Brian left, he was the connection. I worked with him on things. And then Chuck Coyne came in. We did Muscle Car magazine. And then I got fed up with being told one thing and given another. I don't put up with that. And so quietly I went over. My wife, Kathy, at the time, my first wife, a wonderful person, and gave me the confidence to go to Peterson and apply. And I could have never done it without her. I like to give kudos where they belong.
And at this time, Peterson was, people know the Peterson Museum and Peterson.
That hadn't happened yet, no.
Yeah, but that's how younger people know the name of Peterson. How do you describe going to the Peterson Publications the very first time? It was to me, it would have been like going at the end of Wizard of Oz when she finally sees the Emerald Kingdom or whatever. That, as a car guy that never got to go to the Peterson buildings, that would be like, oh, when you walk into the building.
Well, you have it so well. I sat in my car for 5 minutes and shook, just like in the movies, outside the ivory tower of publishing. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, Hot Rod was huge. I think we were at 700,000 between newsstand and subscription. At the time I was there, 88 was the biggest year. That's the year I started. Not because of me, it was the biggest. It just was timing. But they also produced Motor Trend and Carcraft and Rod and Custom. And their advertorial magazine, the biggest moneymaker of the company, Teen, T-E-N, for all those young girls. Mm-hmm. And that was the advertorial magazine. Every spot was paid for by big companies, and it was huge. It was gold. Plus Skin Diver and many motorcyclists. motorcycle magazines, and every gun magazine. Mr. Peterson, Robert E. Peterson. Mr. Peterson had the finest gun collection probably in the world, which is now part of the NRA collection.
Oh, wow.
And it's unsurpassed. It's crazy. It's everything you've ever imagined and not. And he was very good to a lot of people. And that environment was so big, I just could barely handle it. But I went in and I had an interview. The first interview was with Jeff Smith. And one of the first questions out of his mouth, because he didn't know me yet, where did you go to school? And it just went right through me. That was the one thing I was not very happy with in my life, because I'd never studied. I'd never followed that proper path. And so I said, I haven't. And he said, in the most casual and unassuming way, he said, then why are we talking? And he realized what he had implied, and, backed out a little bit. He goes, well, let me see the magazines you brought. So I brought a stack of Broad Actions. I'd shot every cover, did all the features, I think, in those I brought. Dennis had helped me on a couple of things. But from editorial on through was my work. And when I got tired of seeing my name in print, Steve Anderson, I picked up my middle name and my dad's name. My dad's name was Duke. My middle name was Keith, so I used the pseudonym Keith Duke. So half the articles in Rod Action were Keith Duke, the other half were Steve Anderson. And we had the occasional one from Tex and other people and freelancers and different things. And after Jeff looked through the magazines, he very kindly looked me in the eye and he said, you do have a degree, meaning the work I'd done. Mm-hmm. So he said, well, let's talk about it later. And well, the next day I had an interview with Cam Benty, who was the editor at Carcraft. His method was different. We talked for a few minutes, and then he handed me a portfolio about a Oldsmobile Cutlass 442 convertible pace car for Indy, and wanted me to write a piece. He said, tell you what, I need 1,000 words, and you have an hour. So I went in one of the offices, and in about 55 minutes, I handed him an article. And he said, that's good, we're going to use that. Now, I want you to give me 500 words in 1/2 hour. And the hard part is when you cut something down is to retain substance, the consistency through the story, all of that, like what we're talking. And how do you brief something up? How could you do it in 10 words? And so in 30 minutes, I handed it back to him, and he said, you're hired, you start Monday. So a couple of weeks later.
And you said this was 1988.
This was 1988, that's correct. And Jeff Smith calls, and he's like, hey, what happened? I thought you were going to come to work for me. I said, you were slow. And he said, well, best of luck. And we went off and we did stories. I worked with Jim Losey and all kinds of great people there. Brian Atano, people I've always enjoyed very much. And the spot that was open at Hot Rod was Philippe Dawn's feature editor spot. Philippe is a good friend, very special human. I have a funny story about him. Lots of them, but he's just a hilarious guy, and to this day, a good friend. But there was this opening. Jeff calls me again, and he goes, I really want you to come to work here. To quit, to come here, you have to quit. We can't hire from within the company for 6 months. And he wanted me because he needed the space building.
So Jeff was at Carcraft, right?
No, Jeff was at Hot Rod.
Okay.
And Cam Benty was at Hot Rod, at Carcraft.
Okay.
And so he said, you can't tell anybody, you just have to quit. Well, I've always been true to those who take care of me, true in general in nature in my life, because it's the easy way to be. And I went to Cam, and I said, can you keep a secret? He goes, yes. And I said, Jeff wants me to come to work for Hot Rod. And he said, you can't do that. And I said, oh, secret. But I said, you're the one who hired me. That's why I'm talking to you. And if you want me to stay, I'm on the staff. What would you do? And he thought for a few seconds, and he put his hand up, and he said, congratulations. And I went to Hot Rod. And I think because of that, Cam and I never had anything but the best of respect for one another because of the way it was handled. And I went to work for Hot Rod, and gosh, a whole nother world. Like you said, it's what people put on high. It's the magazine and the hot rod industry, at least at that time, always was. From 19, early on to the days of 1948 on, it's always been and still is the best of its type. There was a magazine that came out for a year in December of 41, in January of 41, and went out of business in December of 41 because of the war. That was called Throttle.
Mm-hmm.
Those are extremely rare, pretty cool, and they had kind of a blueprint for Mr. Peterson's books. So I was so blessed in the way I entered the company, and then the opportunities that I had from the start, because that was the room. You go into the office, Jeff's office every month, I think every 2 weeks. We'd have a short meeting on weeklies, a monthly meeting, a yearly meeting. So we'd have a very tight plan on how the book was going to go down. And that was Jeff and Harry Headboy, the publisher, and Gray and other people. I was the newbie, so I would listen and try to give as best I could the information that I had on what we were doing. And Gray was such a character, and fortunately, we created a great friendship right from the start. We spent a lot of time talking politics.
So I want to know, when Gray Baskerville come in for his job interview, did they ask him where he went to school? Because his writing style, he was the guy that he would say "reet," and he was the guy that came up with "bitchin'." Like, he's an English teacher's worst nightmare, but that's what made him special, was his words and stuff that we still use of what he put on there. And I can't imagine him, if he did go to journalist school, that he actually passed with flying colors.
I think he had a better education than I. I'm sure of that. I don't know. I mean, that's a question we never talked about. But he must have had some of that, because he had such a fine point on detail and writing. And the young kids who would be our proofreaders would come into his office, and say, "What do you mean, smoke the bolognas?"
Yeah.
And he'd explain, and the kid would go, "Well, you can't say that." And Gray would be, "Just leave it alone. That's what I'm saying." And
I was always a big fan of that weirdness stories, because as a young BMX kid in the 80s, Bob Osborne in BMX Action Magazine had his own language of stuff that he would, oh, this pro this weekend was faster than grease owl poop. And, he'd put these in the magazine. It's written for teenage kids. And yeah, he had that, he would say, "Here I come from the cloudy mountaintop at Wizard Publications." It was in a warehouse in Torrance, California, but we all believed he was up on this mountain just because his writing style. But yeah, they probably crossed paths in the past before.
Gray was never at a loss for words. He was more about the humor. He would always say things like, "Oh, it's bitchin'." That was his go-to always. He'd always be in his flaps, his red shorts, his hot rod shirt, looking a little disheveled, in his 32 with a little primer on one side. Gray was a unique, special human being, and he was extremely intelligent. And in my opinion, because other people would argue this, I think, he was responsible for some of the introduction to the greatest rodders we know, at least on the coast, probably all across the country. Mm-hmm. And he had such a special way of dealing with those people. They all respected him for that. And he was you couldn't go to an event and walk around with him. He would disappear. He did not like company when he was working. And if he was at an event, he was working. He would always want to have his own space with the people. And I can't ever remember a time when we wouldn't be walking and you turn around and he was gone. He would just do his own thing. And
I've heard stories I've heard a lot of stories. So I've listened to podcasts with Randy Lorenzen and a bunch of guys that have been there, and Brennan. And some of this stuff was almost like that Mad Men TV show of that, the money at Peterson, and some stories that I've heard. I always heard Lorenzen's on Chris Coddington's podcast. He talked about that Baskerville would travel with his own luggage thing that was basically his portable bar. So he didn't go out to have a drink at night. He just, "Oh, you want to have a drink? I have everything in my room," instead of going out and, figuring out how to get back to the room later. But he traveled with his own alcohol.
I don't know about that story. Never heard that, and that's possible. But the good story I remember was a fellow named Bill Burden,
Mm-hmm.
Burden, I think, in New York maybe, and he was old money and had a estate and a garage and a winery or a wine cellar and all this stuff. And when Gray visited him to do a story about beasts of burden was the name of the story. Amazing. I can't remember anything except
Okay.
I study Bible several times a week and I can't remember any passage. It's crazy. But Bill asked him if he wanted some wine. And Gray was open and he said, no, but I like whiskey. And he reached up on this wine in this wine cellar and pulled out a bottle that had been bottled before Prohibition and had like a hand printed label. So like this stuff is as rare as it gets. And I said, so Gray, did you like sip it? Like, did you still have some? He goes, no, I finished it in the motel room that night. What did you do with the bottle? I threw it away.
Oh,
It was just,
Oh.
I was Baskerville, and he was just a character, and was very outspoken, and got into it with me a few times. We got into it over Cadzilla, which is its own separate story of why was Gray Baskerville not driving in Cadzilla. But I don't want to lead your show. You're the one with the question.
As we were we mentioned his famous 32 that he drove the wheels off of. I'm friends with the guy that owns that car now. Shelton is his last name. I'm blank on his first name. It's Chris Shelton that worked at the magazines for all the years.
Yep.
His dad owns Gray's car.
Has he changed it at all?
Nope. Still got the primer spot on it. Same caps, everything. He believes kind of why it was offered to him to be the caretaker, because they knew that he would take care of it. Like for the 75th anniversary of Hot Rod, they had a display out front of SEMA, and he brought the car, and me and him, like, man, I'm so mad. I hug him whenever I see him. I just hugged him at the Roadster show.
You hug a lot of dudes.
Well, he's hilarious. And we're standing there, and he goes, you ever realize we're starting to get old? I go, yeah, but sir, you're a little older than me. He goes, this iconic car, we're at the SEMA show. 1 out of every 500 people walk by that car and knows it. Everybody else is like,
Isn't that amazing?
why is that primered spotted 32 sitting out here? They have no idea the history of that car. So, yeah.
Gray was, he would drive that in the rain. He didn't care. I've met few people who use a car like he did. He would come in completely soaked in the Roadster from Pasadena where he lived, and he'd been driving in the rain. I mean, there's stories I can't even remember about him in that car. It was, and everybody loved him for it because it showed that he wasn't about the show scene. He understood it. He supported it, but he was very much that car. And
and again, I think him driving that car and showing driving that car speared on. Brizio would always put together a group of guys and drive to Indy for the good guys, and Dennis Varney and a bunch of those guys would come along, and probably all because of what Gray did.
Well, I'm sure you know the story probably better than I do, but there was a car that Gray raced early on called the M&M, I think it was a Model T pickup drag car, had I think 10 spokes in the front, American 5s in the back, it was yellow. And the car went away for whatever reason. And again, I'm sorry I don't have all the particulars on this, but Pete Eastwood and Pete and Jake and a bunch of other people came together and built him a new version of the M&M Special or the M&M T pickup that was spectacular and out of their own pockets and out of their love for Gray Baskerville. And I would guess that few journalists have ever had that kind of admiration and show of appreciation as those guys did, building him this incredible car. I don't know where it is today, but to me,
they did that with another guy, Tom Medley. His 40 Ford burned up in a garage, and a bunch of people got together and rebuilt him a car and gave it back to him. Randy from not Hot Rods and Hobbies, Hot Rods and Custom Stuff out of Escondido. Randy Clark. He spearheaded that car, and they got it restored back for Medley. So
And
that's
Stroker, I mean, who could be better than he? He was such a wonderful.
yeah.
I'm so lucky that I was able to know these, and I knew Tom more from the days I spent at Good Guys, following my years at Peters.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom was just the most genteel, creative, loving person. He couldn't have been nicer. He was in some ways, the antithesis of Gray. In his nature was much more serious and quiet and demure. But he was the consummate hot rodder, and of course his art. I just gave a piece away that I'd had for a long time to someone who showed interest in one of his Stroker McGurk cartoons. And I was always very much admired his skills, his writing skills, his understanding of the hobby. I call it a hobby because a sport is something you do to win something, and of course, hot rodding we do because we love it. Yes.
Yeah, I'd still call those hats, the little short hats, because that's what
Yeah.
he would draw. The Stroker McGirt cartoon always had that hat. I don't know what they're called. They have
Yeah.
a name, but I still call them the Stroker.
Stroker hat.
I still call them the Stroker hat. Yeah, yeah.
That's what they are. That's what they are. Absolutely. Whatever it was called, now they're Stroker hats. Yeah.
So okay, you're at Hot Rod. What's one of your biggest things that you in the first few years that you got before we start talking about Cadzilla?
Sure.
What was what do you remember as like, oh, I can't believe I got to do this within a couple of years of being there? We talked the other night. I don't know where it is in the time frame of, we know the magazine guys is like, oh yeah, okay, we're going to talk about you driving Cadzilla, or you shot this car, or the Van Halen guys had cars being, done and shot and featured in magazines and all these people. But I didn't know about some of the race car stuff. But when you go back and look at Hot Rod covered absolutely everything. They covered Bonneville. They covered some IndyCar races and some drag racing and U.S. Nationals and all that stuff. And so let's talk about some of that. It may be out of order, but like you've rode with Rick Mears and uh, uh, Jackie Stewart, the Formula One guy. I mean, that's the first guy I never really followed Formula One, but that's the guy that you kind of knew who he was because he was on TV after I probably knew him after he retired when he started doing all the appearances everywhere. But talk about the connections of Hot Rod and everything that you guys did, like mind blowing stuff.
Well, to me, the thing I always wanted to do, never imagined I would be doing, even while I was there, because the top stories were the purview of Gray, John Bechtel, who was an incredible technical writer, and other guys on staff, Jeff and Marlon Davis, a savant of the utmost kindness and love, a car guy like nobody else, a guy with a memory that nobody's ever surpassed. He was very unusual. He's no longer with us. He was a great guy and very helpful to me.
Yeah, Marlon wrote the in-depth tech articles, didn't he?
In-depth isn't even a word. I remember on one occasion, Jeff had mentioned something at a meeting. We were all there. He mentioned something in loose form. What if we did a story like this? Well, Marlon, when you lit that wick, you had to stand back because the fire was white hot. He went in and did research and comes back in with arms full of books of research about the concept. And Jeff goes, oh, well, I don't think we're going to do that right now. I was just bringing it up. And Marlon went in his office and cried. He was so upset. He was such an unusual character, but whatever he wrote was, he knew part numbers in his head of which fender was what number and what bumper and what engine. Amazing. And so
if we have some younger people listening. Yes, this was before Google and the internet, which you could just go type in a part number of something and it spits up stuff on the internet. You actually had to go to books and do research, and it was a lot of effort to do that. So
not only did Marlon know where to do the research,
yeah,
he knew how to do the research, but he memorized everything. You couldn't ask him a question about something he'd written where he wouldn't have a 2-minute, 5-minute, 10-hour answer. He was just such a powerful mind and an example of why we should appreciate everyone for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody there loved him because.
And now fast forward when they still had a slightly bigger staff at a Hot Rod. So I don't know how many years ago. And I heard this on something. I think it was David Freiberger. And when he worked at Hot Rod for a lot of years, and they said they were having their planning meeting, and Carol Shelby had passed away. And they looked at two of the younger guys at the table, I don't know, younger on the staff, says, one of you guys need to write the memorial article for the magazine on Carol Shelby. They looked at him and said, who is Carol Shelby?
Oh,
That should be a question before you get hired at any automotive magazine. So
sorry.
I'm going to tell this story. I've said it before. So you have a lot of great stories of interactions with people. This is my Carol Shelby story. I've said this on the podcast before.
Great.
So, you see Carol Shelby, you get his autograph, you talk to him at a show, you shake his hand, Some of these guys, it's like, oh, I shook the hand of Sinatra. You shake, Gray Baskerville, Steve Anderson, Scott Colleen, all these, you shake the hands of the greats, they say, And so we built a vehicle for Ford one year for SEMA, and we go to the party at SEMA. It's private. You got to have a pass. You come in. It's in their booth after hours at SEMA. It's dark outside. And it's such a big deal. The Beach Boys are playing. It said on the invitation, come party to the sounds of the Beach Boys. You think it's a cover band. No, it's the real Beach Boys playing. This is how much money Ford used to spend on their SEMA party. So we're walking through the crowd, and this blonde girl comes up to me. Tim, Carrie, I haven't seen you guys forever. What are you doing here? I knew you were in the car world. And I was like, oh, we build hot rods. We got cars at show. We built a car for Ford this year. She goes, hold on. I got to go get my boss. You have to tell him how we know each other. She disappears in the crowd. She comes back, dragging Carol Shelby.
Oh, my God.
I knew this girl from small town Illinois. I showed cattle against her in 4-H. This small town Midwesterns, and here we are happen on each other at Vegas. And so we sat there and talked cattle and farming because, Carol was a chicken farmer. So he was all interested. And this girl, for years, if you watched like the Barrett Jackson's auctions, when Carol was up there auctioning something off for his children's foundation, she was in charge of his children's foundation.
How special is that?
His charity. And she worked there for long. She worked there a few years even after he passed away. And I still see her. She was at PRI this year. I still see her. And we always laugh about the Carol Shelby standing at the Ford. They're all thinking we're talking about some race car or something. No, we're talking about chickens and show cattle at the Ford party. So, yeah.
I love it.
That's my great Carol Shelby story. So
it is. He was a gentleman. He was always nice. I met him on a couple of occasions. And going back a bit, kind of to the beginnings when I was at Rod Action, there was a press day for the Shelby Proving Grounds. I don't know if there's a factory was there or how that all was, but they made was it a Dodge Colt that they made a special Shelby version of? Omni, maybe, I forget, a Dodge Omni, I think, a little box, and they put turbochargers on them. Mm-hmm. And at this Proving Grounds, they had all the journalists out, and the driving competition, again, I'd had some good Canyon years of learning. One of the semifinals, I went up against Randy Lorenzen, and I beat him. But no, I made it up to the semis or quad finals against him. And going into the last bend, I looked over at him. I missed my apex, and he beat me to make it. That was now the semi. He ended up against Jeff Smith. And again, Jeff was quite the driver. And who won the Rolex from Carol Shelby? Jeff Smith, beating Randy Lorenzen. And so it all kind of connects. I didn't know either of these guys, and they certainly didn't know me at that time. And it's just funny how things go full circle. But those are the amazing parts. And back to what access, and I love your story. It's such a good thing about somebody who still remembers and is still about the basics that you guys grew up with. That's neat in relationships. The cars were an aside for you, actually, compared to the things you do at 4-H. It's cool. But one of the things that was funny, because Marlon didn't speak anything except hot rods and muscle cars in particular. He had his own Cyclone truck when they first came out. He had that thing forever. Jeff Smith was all about Chevelles and Caminos and Camaros and whatever. And others had their interests, but mine were based in a bigger picture because it was so new to me. So every time there was a trip to visit General Motors backroom, whatever type of press thing. There's always something you don't know about when you go to them. Getting to hear her official talk, and then him later showing you some back rooms. I got to see a Cadillac prototype with a Lotus V12 in it. Car never made it to the light of day. And sitting next to a car that was a little more ungainly, don't know anything about it. I have photographs of that still, that were just projects that they work on that have been designed, carried through the clay section, and then prototyped to some degree, but never saw it. On one occasion, there was a trip to go to Coney in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and nobody wanted to go because it was Coney. And that was easily one of the greatest trips. It had a whole bunch of fun things to watch destruction engineers try to destroy shock absorbers, to go out on cobblestone roads and learn that ABS doesn't work at 100 miles an hour on cobblestone. And because the wheels were always in the air, cobblestone, so if the timing gets off, pretty soon it doesn't want to stop. And an M5 Beamer of all things. And just the opportunities that you just see stuff that you would have never seen. Being at Hot Rod, and I'm sure it was for everyone there, and it was just especially great. But he wouldn't have been at these functions. He was a different guy with that. I'd look over, and there would be one of the executives with Ford, General Motors, whoever it was, and they would give you the sign like, come here. And we go in a back room, and they'd show me stuff by myself. What's about the other journalists? Well, how come they're not here? Because I work for Hot Rod Magazine. It was amazing the reach, the access that it allowed because of its history and the purity of it. And that was all Mr. Peterson, starting with his own camera, going to Santa Ana and Bakersfield, which was Famoso, drag strips, to the lakes, the dry lakes, Muroc, Bonneville. He started that movement, and it always stayed with the company because he was a hot rodder. He was an enthusiast of many sports and many things. And he brought that to other people. And I think people were chosen to fit that model that he started. And so I was so lucky to try things and go places that you just never see. Again, being at the proving grounds at Mesa, Arizona, that was private. They didn't let you have cameras. You had to put them in a box. When we drove through the garage, there were twin turbocharged Corvettes up in the racks that you couldn't really get to see very well, but things that just you don't have. And dare I say, my test track a lot of times was just up the street from Peterson's office in Beverly Hills on side streets, doing 0 to 60s in Corvette, ZR1s. They have their own police department, Beverly Hills Cop, right? So the fact that I didn't get arrested and beaten
blue
to
Chevy
death.
Nova sometimes too, though.
I'm sorry?
Sometimes there's a guy from Detroit that comes out to the Beverly Hills Police Department, and he drives a crappy blue Chevy Nova. His name's Axel Foley.
Axel Foley, that's right. That's right. So, I love the access to the car. I drove the first NSXs. I borrowed them 3 different times. 3 of my friends bought them because of those rides. I remember taking a preacher from church in the Viper car I had, which was early production. It wasn't production yet. It was pre-production, I think. And took him for a ride. He said, well, we've got to take the physics teacher for a ride. And we went to his house, explained that we just went 100 in a 45 in this neighborhood we lived in. And the physics teacher said, that's not possible, until he rode with me and we rewrote physics. And so confident was he in the drive, he didn't think about the fact we were going faster than he'd ever been. When we got home, he said, can you give each of my sons that same ride? They were like 12 and 15. And he entrusted them. It was a weird thing. We created hot rodders in the process. But I remember going to an upholstery shop when I was later with Buckaroo, and taking a policeman for a ride at 100 miles an hour in a Viper along a frontage road next to the 101 highway. You just do a lot of stuff, and you also get yourself into trouble. In that NSX, I almost killed a fan. And I don't tell anybody that, but at this point in life, it should be known that we're not as good as we think we are. And going to work one day, going through the canyon. I passed a car in a no passing zone, and a family backed out in a Volvo wagon in front of me. I was doing probably 80 on Cornell Road. And they had the presence of mind to pull back in, and otherwise I would have gone right through their car.
Mm.
And that's when I stopped playing around.
Yeah.
Stopped driving cars, stopped going fast, stopped doing the canyons, stopped using other people's stuff like it was my own. And I say this with
I grew up in the middle of nowhere. So we always pretended we were like the Duke boys because my dad had 200 acres. It was a Christmas tree farm, so there was paths. We built a creek jump, with like $200 cars from the junkyard. So we did all of our stupid crap on the prop. That's what Dad says. I know you're going to do stupid stuff, so do it on the farm. So when you screw up, you're not that far for me to save you. Or if you roll a car, you're across the road from the house or something like that.
Sure.
I read a story one time, kind of jumping back a little bit, talking about the physics guy, that on how it's crazy on how even stuff from that era on what we're doing now with automobiles. There was it was in one of the magazines on how this physics guy said with tires and wind velocity and aerodynamics, says there is no way a car will ever go over 200 mile an hour in the quarter mile. Like, I forget what it was in. It was an article, or I've watched a clip on YouTube of some interview, and like they want to go back and guys probably passed away because this was probably, I don't know, 60s or 70s. Now they're running 330 in the quarter mile.
Sure.
So we took a quick break right there, and we are back. And let's continue talking. You were telling me the other night that you have rode and done some stuff with Rick Mears, Jackie Stewart, Scott Brayton, rest in peace, IndyCar driver. We were talking about that the other night, that the last time I was in a guy's collection, he had the car that Scott Brayton got killed in. I think it was at Indy. He backed it into the wall. Like, car's barely cracked. And this guy, Matt Hay, Pro Street guy. You probably remember Matt and Debbie Hay, the pink team.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful cars. Yeah.
Still friends with Matt and see him when I go to Phoenix and
Debbie.
And Debbie. And just seeing
I remember he did a Cavalier at one time, a yellow one.
Yeah, he started with a white Cutlass and then the pink T-Bird, but then he got into buying and selling IndyCar stuff, and he still does. Like, has warehouses full of stuff. And nobody wants a car that somebody got killed in. So he'll sell it, and then he'll buy a collection, a semi full of stuff, and they're like, oh, but you have to take the Scott Brayton car. He sold that and got it back 3 times because nobody wants it. That's the thing. Oh, if you want this deal that I'm giving you, you got to take the Scott Brayton car again. Oh, man. So I think he's got it gone, but it was there, I don't know, 6 years ago when I was in the building. So, yeah, I got to ride with Al Unser Jr. and Robbie Unser before in some race cars. So that was kind of cool.
That's saying a lot. They were fantastic. Well, Scott, I think, took 2 poles at Indy, including the year he was killed practicing afterwards. Next day or whatever it was. It's so there was a function at Phoenix, and I think it was a Chevrolet gig, and they had the PPG pace truck. I don't know if it was from Indy or what races it paced, but it was in a wild paint job, orange and yellow. It was quite bright and had a killer motor and was set up. And Scott Brayton took me around Phoenix several laps, as did Wally Dallenbach's wife, who was a race driver, and she was there and drove after Scott did. But riding with Scott around Phoenix was amazing because we're in a pickup truck. It's not like your average race car. And Scott, as we go into turn 1, he looks over at me quickly and back to the track and over to me and back to the track, and he goes, "You notice how it's pushing right here?" And then we get mid-corner going towards turn 2, and he said, now it comes, and he's looking over at me casually as we're blistering through this corner, and he goes, okay, it's going neutral. And then as we were coming out of the corner, it goes tail oversteer, goes tail out towards the pit wall, the pit exit wall, and he doesn't even think about it. And we go to the other end of the track, and we come back again, and we're going through the corner, and it's crossed up, and it's just like, he's an IndyCar driver, Steve. He didn't grow up driving canyons and think he's somebody when he's not. He's incredible, and he was. And then riding with Wally Dallenbach's wife, and I unfortunately do not remember her name. She was delightful. Fantastic driver. It was incredible. So a similar story. And it was only a year or two later that Scott lost his life. And I can't imagine the situation of having owned a car that someone died in.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, Bridgestone did a publicity piece for all of the press in Fort Stockton, Texas, outside of Dallas, I think. I think it's northwest of Dallas, but I'm not sure. And Bridgestone has a magnificent, huge facility out there, I think still, with a several mile semi-oval in the middle of the desert, plus off-road areas and skid pads and skid pans and every kind of facility there to test tires, under all conditions. And the first guy to roll up wasn't, you mentioned Rick Mears, it was actually his brother, Roger Mears.
Oh, okay.
Who had won, I think he won Baja 1000 twice.
Mm-hmm.
Again, don't quote me on this. I think that was his number. And he had raced in Indy with his brother, but that wasn't as much his thing as off-road.
Mm-hmm.
He was very good at it. And he had a Nissan Stadium truck that had been used the previous weekend at an event, I think, at Anaheim, but I'm not sure it was that in history. And so the motor was a little rough, but he took me out. I was the first person in the truck. And we headed out across the desert at 100 miles an hour, and then some. And it was like a baby carriage. It had 22 and 21 inches of travel front and rear. It was, probably 300 horse maybe out of that 6-cylinder engine. And it was loud and it was crazy. And I remember going into a sand wash. It was probably a 4-foot drop. And at 100 and floating for the longest time, and then getting to the other side of the sand wash and hitting that wall of sand and launching into the air 10 or 12 feet. It was unbelievable. And we're still moving fast. And then landing, and then he'd put it up on the right side 2 wheels. He said, this is called bicycling. And we'd ride on those 2 for a few seconds. Then he'd go to the other side. He said, you do this when you're trying to avoid stuff in the desert. And we get back, and who else was there but Dick Gullstrand, who was one of the Corvette guys early on, and Jackie Stewart, Sir Jackie Stewart later. And he was there just as a crowd pleaser because he was such a character. He had that great Scottish brogue, and his way was so unusual and fun.
And he usually wore a hat that looked like the Stroker McGurk hat too, didn't he?
Absolutely, with a Scotch or blend plaid, I think they call it, green and red plaid. And he was so much fun because I'd always seen him on ABC as somewhat pompous. He was nothing like that. He was extremely self-effacing, shared a lot, laughed a lot, made fun of himself. He was so congenial and proper and wonderful. And so when I get out of the truck, here's all the press waiting to get in, and Jackie Stewart standing in front of them all. And I said, here you go, Jackie. And I hand him my helmet, which would have been about 10 sizes too big for him. And he goes, oh, no, I don't ride in off-road trucks. I'm a Formula One guy. And I said to the crowd, are we going to let him do that? And everybody went, no. And with that, Roger's goading him, and he puts on a helmet and gets in the truck. And Roger looks over everybody like, watch this, because I've got the greatest Formula One driver in the day, 27 wins total, nothing by today's standards. But at the time, he was the guy, and takes him on a run where we could actually see the truck rising out of the horizon, out of the pucker bushes. And that was it for the motor. He holed the block with one of the pistons, came in, bang, 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 and shut her off, and that was it. But to then sit across from Jackie that night for dinner and to drive a ZR1 to a slalom with him in the passenger seat after he showed me how to do it, you just don't get those chances in life. To be with someone who you've idolized. And so those kind of scenarios. I remember Mears comes in on this, we're standing on a circle of concrete. We're all around the edge with a wall between us and this little circle. And it was to test run out on tires at really low speed. So it was a perfectly flat piece of concrete, as the story was told to me then. Here comes Roger in the ZR1 tail out and does about 3 circles around it, completely tail out, just smoking the tires. Showed his understanding of just handling a vehicle, the car he wasn't used to, putting it in this really tight space. And Gulfstream chewed him out because you don't do that there. It's just that's not how you use it. It was funny to watch these guys all work. Going to you were asked about different things that you get to do. It's the things that you don't think about initially that I came to the factory, different experiences traveling. When David Freiberger was fairly new, he and I were chosen to do a story about the EVOC, Emergency Vehicle Something Center in San Bernardino. And we did the story together. And what EVOC was if you were a California law enforcement person and you had an accident, you had to go to EVOC to learn how to drive. Because not everybody who's in law enforcement can drive as well. So we joined a class, and it was classroom time, but they also had a very expensive facility with a tri-oval, banked tri-oval, with an infield with ups and downs through water, all kinds of things, a skid pan, which was polished concrete with 2 inches of water held in it. So you could do ice driving at 5 miles an hour in the summer. And it was amazing. And they'd show you videos, and Freiberger and I were such enthusiasts. Both he was a good driver as well, is a good driver, and I'm sure still. And we went out and cleaned up on that thing. They taught us how to do race backwards and then pull the e-brake and spin 180 and take off, and how to do all that stuff because it was part of the driving. How to shut people off on, trying to get away, all kinds of amazing stuff. And I remember I went through a slalom and somebody said near David, well, they gave him a faster car because we could outrun the police. But that was a great bonding time for David and I. And I remember Ford gave us a new police car when the old Galaxies had gone away, and that's all they had at the facility. And we showed up in the newest one, and that was a big deal. But it's those kind of experiences that don't seem very big, but at the time you get to see aspects of life that otherwise you don't get to enjoy. And it builds a bond between each of us. I was supposed to ride in Big Red for the Silver State event, and I asked a couple of friends and my wife about it, and they pretty much said, if you do this, you don't care about your friends or your wife. Because it's obviously dangerous. And it was the first time in my life I ever turned down something because something I wanted to do, but it wasn't right.
Yeah, because like
Joe Pettit,
Silver State race, still people die there like almost every year.
People died that year. I think some people went off in a Testarossa, husband and wife. But Joe Pettit took the seat, and to this day, he's the guy. He averaged 197, I think was there over 92 miles, 197 mile an hour average. They were doing 222 for the longest distance. And I always wish I'd have done that. That would have been a highlight. But Joe got to do it, and he got to do it again later when they rebuilt the Big Red, and then it burned, and then they rebuilt it again. And Joe rode with RJ and did another slower event. But those are the kind of things that
people walk up
just don't get to do.
After they redid it, they had it at the Good Guys show. I don't know. It's been since COVID. 2-3 years ago, they had them at Columbus, I think, and people were still like, "Oh my, look at that!" You hear them talking. The Big Red's down there. You got to go get a hero card signed or buy a T-shirt. And yeah, people know Big Red now more than they know Gray Baskerville's 32 Roadster. Yeah,
it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Scott Colleen did a wonderful one of his build books, he called them, which were coffee table books about specific cars and the build from the first turn of the key of a stock car to the finished product. And he followed that car, including when it had burned, and had to go back and finish up things that had to be redone. And if you can find one of those, it's certainly the quintessential review of Big Red and any car that Scott did.
I have some of them built.
Just a fantastic photographer.
When we get Scott on here, I'll have to dig out some of my build books to have him as a prop when he's on. But yeah, those build books that Scott did, they were pretty incredible. They did a Rad Rides car, Ring Brothers car, the who's who in there. I think a Steve Strope car. but that was kind of, we'll go back and talk about some more hot rod stuff, but that was kind of like when he did that, he was almost like a little bit ahead of the game, yes, but that's kind of when the magazine stuff kind of started winding down just a little bit, not as hard as they did a handful of years ago, but
Sure.
yeah, he did a good job with those things. They were really amazing. Yeah.
Well, Scott is a detail perfectionist. He's an artist, and he's just so sharp in so many ways, and has helped me more than anybody in my life with my creative, trying to keep me in the right place. And as far as photography, never will be, never was Scott Clean. Very few people are.
And
He has an eye.
we're gonna have him on the podcast here pretty soon. He's said it, yes,
Good.
do it, and I got his new card. So one time, this is my Scott Clean story that I'll tell him too. He hollered at me and called me a dumbass.
Just once?
That's Scott.
I believe it was the Riviera or Rivette. He was shooting for was it Popular Hot Rodding because another guy shot. Anyway, he was shooting a car, early 2000s, and it puked some antifreeze on this perfect chunk of asphalt that we found. And I went up there and started drying it, like with a towel. You don't smear antifreeze, you dumbass. Every time I see antifreeze on the ground, like a car show when they pull, I hear Scott's voice. Don't wipe it, you dumbass.
I love it.
Yeah.
Scott is the most outspoken guy and says what he thinks. He even makes up his own words sometimes.
Yeah.
He's dear to me. I remember a couple of occasions. Once we're up in the canyons, really tight canyon. I think it was Tuna or I forget, but one of the tighter canyons around Mulholland. And he lays in the gutter on this corner, right hand corner, and he goes, "I want you to put the right front wheel right here, right next to my head when you drive by." And I went by, and I was 2 feet out, and he said, "No, do it again." About the third try, he said, "Stop." And then he gives me the dumbass routine. "What, did you not hear what I said, dumbass? You know, and I want you to put the wheel right by my head. Don't worry about it. You won't hit me." And we got the shot. On another occasion, he was standing on the roof, hanging on to ropes as we're driving through a canyon, following a car. And he's any moment, if he lost grip on the rope, he's done. He's going to go off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
We flew an Impala on a guy's ranch up there that had a private road that had a perfect whoop-de-doo to get a car airborne. And we tried it a few times and got the shot. The last one, I had my hands in the air, no steering wheel in hand as it was midair. I think I'm just so fantastic. I'm a regular Mario Fittipaldi. And no, Motor Trend goes back there with Scott because that was his little secret stop. And they jumped a Impala and a Galaxy on that same one-lane road and have them both in the air at the same time. I mean, nobody could have gotten that done but Scott. He's always been a person who his work ethic is the finest. He'll outwork anyone. He has a great attitude, and he doesn't spare you if you don't do his ass. He's a great person.
Yeah.
Great in the industry. A lot of people should be thankful.
Pretty soon. So I got a driving story when I was at the TV studio. I wasn't filming that day. And when they got cars sometimes, and this one, they went to the Ford dealership, rented a Mustang. They put a whole bunch of performance upgrades on a supercharger, exhaust, catback system, all this stuff. Well, then their schedule was behind on the motor show that was doing that. So, and I wasn't filming that day. So they're like, "Hey, Tim, we can edit this out and darken the windows in post," because they couldn't tint the windows because they were taking the car back to the dealership the next day.
Sure.
And so I went out with Rob, Big Rob, the camera guy that was always on the truck show at that time. He was filming because, again, the other shows were behind. So we go out to film this, and here now, about 20 miles from where we lived, there was this road, Arno Road. Let's say the secret. They had permission from the neighbors and the police. If we're going to go stupid driving stuff that we needed, like an old highway, we were allowed to film out in the country on that road. So we go there, and I'm, doing burnouts for them, all this stuff. And Rob says, "Okay, up there where we do the donuts, I'm going to stand in the middle, and you're going to go around me like you're Ken Block." And I am like, I am not Ken Block. Kind of like, the story, you're 2 foot away from Scott's head because you don't want to kill your buddy. And I go and I do around, and he goes, "Don't be a sissy, do it." So I'm like, he goes, "If we tear the transmission out, they'll put a transmission in it before." He goes, "We have permission to get some really good shock." So I pop the clutch, and I'm just frying the tires, and I'm whipping back and forth, and there's so much smoke, I lose track of where Rob is. And this guy, he got his start filming live action stuff for news in downtown Louisville and all this stuff, and great cameraman, still at the Power Nation Now studios, great camera guy. And again, stories that he's got of traveling and working for different things and what he's done and running and getting shot out with a camera on his shoulder, all this stuff. And I'm just waiting for the thump on the quarter panel. And then finally I stopped, and he's like, "That was effing awesome." And he goes, and I was like, "Oh man, I thought I was going to kill him that day, but I had fun." Yeah. Yeah. I think
Absolutely.
they had to put new tires on it. So okay, you're at Hot Rod. Let's talk a little bit. So Steve, when I talked to you the other night, he wanted me to get Rob Canan on. We didn't do that. We tried getting Rob Canan on earlier before, and he had some internet problems. He wasn't in a good place for internet. So we're going to talk about Cadzilla stories a little bit. And then we're going to do another podcast in the future with Rob Canan on his own to get all of his stories. And then if we can get this, we've never done a double at the same time. I would like to do an episode of you and Rob telling road trip stories of the stuff that you guys did at Hot Rod Magazine. I think that, so we'll get all the stories from you. We'll get his separate, and then we're going to get you guys back in the future as a double team guest
No,
of
that's
this.
not how it happened. Yeah, it was. That's how I remember.
Yeah. We'll just sit there and listen to you guys. It's like, no, that ain't what. Yeah.
So he's lying.
Yeah. So okay,
Rob is always the most exceptional person.
This Hot Rod Magazine, September 1990.
I'm holding one in my hand.
And you're driving here. Here you are reading a map with Boyd Coddington. Epic mustache, by the way. Nice.
Let me see that. Because I'm a sophomore in high school right in this time.
All the staff behind. There's some legends from the shop there. And there's Steve.
All of them, yeah.
And here, a trip. There's a picture. There's that picture you were talking about. Rob behind the wheel.
Yep.
And unbelievable story. Here you are. You stopped at Raul Del
White Castle.
Tamale.
Raul is stellar. He still has a tortilla business here, Racolitas.
Yeah.
Raul De La Torre and his wife Madi are extremely close friends of mine, and he has a beautiful car collection. And they're just over in Denver area. And we've been close since that trip when we met. And I met Daryl Mayab on that trip. And I met several people that were pivotal in the hot rodding industry. And Raul was always, he's always been one of the kinder people. We actually, if you look at the picture of the valve cover, there are two of his sisters' tamales from her company heating on the intake manifold of that 500 Caddy at Cadzilla.
So
not too many people ever cook food in that car.
But ever since that article, I've been on about every road trip that I've done. Somebody has mentioned that and put like a gas station burrito on because it was like, oh, Scott and Rob did that. That's still a thing that people do. And it says you put them on the intake, maintain 65 mile an hour for about 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
That's a good. Carrie doesn't follow recipes, so she would burn them. She would leave them on there too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's how every recipe reads, right? 320 for 20 minutes. And so we would cruise it for 20 minutes at whatever speed, and then they would get to the right temperature. And one of the things that Raul was the guy who came up with that, Manifold Cuisine. I know it was a book, but before I ever read about it, he's the one who said, well, now you got to double. He and his brother Richie met me at a Marriott when we were driving another car and taught us how to do that. But you double wrap them in aluminum. And that way the carbon monoxide doesn't get into the burrito and taste better. I mean,
somebody had to learn that the hard way.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. Remember Gary Volling? He had a Roadster 48 turquoise 48 Ford pickup that he built out of a sedan, I think, or out of I'm not sure. but it was a roadster pickup, kind of like the one Chip had drawn early in Rod Action back when we all started with that. But yeah, all those guys were unbeknownst to me. I never met them, and now they're within miles. I don't think I'm not sure Gary Volling's doing too well or Daryl, but they were always fantastic with me, always helped me. And yeah, so with Cadzilla, it's an endless story, and I think
Thing was
I could hardly.
it was fresh, right? Like barely some shakedown miles on it.
No, none. They've gone around the block a couple times, and they were still. If you notice the wheels in the studio version that Randy shot, Randy Lorenzen, it had the 19-inch hubcaps in the front. You couldn't see the backs because it was so low, and it did have screw jacks on the rear suspension to raise it and lower it, but maintain the ride, which was always genius to me. But the front wheels had to be machined, and they were 16s or 16s, I think, in a normal style wheel that looks like the ones that were hubcaps, but actually were real wheels. They were machining those as Rob and I arrived to leave. They were finishing the wheels.
Oh, wow.
That's how last minute it was. Like, there's no exaggeration. I drove it around the block with, I forget, Carl or whoever it was, Lars. We drove around the block a couple times. Everything was fine. Rob got in. We drove away and got into the Santa Ana Freeway or 5 or whatever, and it was traffic. And here we are driving out for the first time in traffic. We made our way across to the Cajon Pass and down towards over the hill and down towards the Vegas, going through Victorville, which it mentions in that story as the first stop. We pulled into the gas station and Texaco station because they sponsored the trip, which was a lot of gas stops, really short range. And we're out there for just a few minutes, and here comes a Chevelle, I think a 67 or 68 Chevelle, with a bunch of kids in it, guys in it, and they screech up to a halt and jump out arguing of, yes, it is, no, it isn't, that's Cadzilla, no, it isn't. The guy goes back into the car, and he had the premiere edition when it was in the studio from Randy's work with him in the car. That's how much that article meant, that they had it in the car. And he walks up and he goes, look. And the guy goes, that is Cadzilla, isn't it? And then they're like, what are you doing? Which we covered in the story.
So I didn't bring that issue home. It was in the month or two before. That's when they had the pull-out poster with the band and all that. And then after the studio, again, then they changed the wheels, and then you did the drive.
Yep. As in this poster. Yeah, I still have about 10 of these I found yesterday.
Okay, so
for this
one I need one of those, and this is how much magazine nerd that I am, because that's not the poster from the magazine, because it's not folded, because the magazine would have been folded up. So they had.
That's why these cost $500.
Oh, maybe
versus the one that's in the magazine.
I don't really need one then. I don't really need one.
You'll have one. I'll get it to you. I didn't even know I had them until yesterday. I had one that was all bent from being not in a tube, and I pulled out a tube with some Formula One stuff in it, and within that were, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these. So I'll get you one, and for less than $500. But there's a shot that I was just so much fun, and it was actually one of the last shots we did in Cadzilla while we were at Pete and Jake's. That was a whole unique situation that led there. But there was a White Castle right up the street, and it was early in the morning, and it had just opened, and we thought, let's totally disregard the finest car ever built, maybe. Certainly what Harry Hibbler, the publisher, said was the most popular car in Hot Rod Magazine history by many different surveys and people. And we put White Castle on the fold-down dash area. And, people are saying, you didn't eat in the car. Well, of course not. No, we wouldn't do that. I've eaten in nice cars before, not that. But it was actually interesting. We never trailered the car. That's something people never can believe. 2,200 plus miles. And only near the end of the trip did we put the car in the box to drive, to move it. Otherwise, it was only used at night to park the car away from prying eyes and hands. So every night we'd pull in, put it away, and then next day we'd take it out. Rob had to do that. I couldn't get in the window, which was very small. The door couldn't open, and to get through there was no door glass made, never was, because it was a compound curve they couldn't get to hold.
So it's got quarter panel glass in it, but it's never had door glass in it, you say?
That's correct. That's correct. And when we were going after those guys in the Chevelle, we left, and it talks about it in brief, but nothing to the degree that it was. We're heading to Vegas. We've left Victorville. The tank's got enough to make it there, the 120 miles or whatever we have to go. And here comes a sandstorm from we're going to Vegas, so we're going north of the show from the east. Here comes a sandstorm, and there was no side windows in the door, no door glass. And it just is pelting us like a sandblaster. And it was pretty harsh. And the first thing we're talking about is the paint job, which couldn't be more than a few weeks old. And on this incredible handmade 18 or 20 gauge body, designed by Larry Erickson and built by Craig Knapp, the finest piece of metal work that I think has ever happened in hot rodding, in my humble opinion. Incredible. And we're thinking it's over. We're going to tear this thing up. The paint's going to be ruined. And we stayed at the Mirage. And when we got there, we looked it over, and there wasn't a mark on the paint. It was as if it had been polished. It was perfect. But we had to dig probably 2 or 3 pounds of sand out of the interior of Cadzilla. I mean, when you drive a car, it's about driving it. People have no idea. There's very few cars that have been abused as that was. We had it 100 miles an hour in Grand Junction at about midnight. We had it at 100 miles an hour plus in Indianapolis, always with state approval. I have to add that part. Allegedly, I think it's
allegedly. We say allegedly a lot on this podcast.
Yes, there's a lot of alleged in what I've been telling you. None of my things I've told you tonight are true, especially about my speeding in Beverly Hills and all that. I never did that. Wasn't me. Possible. But Cadzilla opened doors and enabled things that just you couldn't believe. We were on Highway 15 leaving Vegas, and a little town before you get to 70, which then heads east. And we went into a Burger King. Burger King? Yeah. Wendy's, maybe. And sitting in there are a father and his son, and in the parking lot right next to them is a 64 Chevy Impala. It was pretty cool. And of course, they take interest in Cadzilla. And the dad goes, "Well, I got a really nice 409 car at home. Would you like to see that?" "Sure." So while he goes and gets it, trades cars, Rob takes his 8, 9, 10-year-old son, whatever he was, for a ride around the block in Cadzilla. I mean, and the dad gets back and he goes, "Can I go?" And I don't know, Rob or me said, "No, we got to go." "Oh, come on." "No." So for the rest of his son's life, he's telling his dad, "I got to ride Cadzilla."
Yeah.
Oh, it was so cool. And then, we pulled on to 70 there. It's a hard right. And if you look at that opening shot of Cadzilla in that article, and you're looking down from the rear of the car, you can see the rollers under the back bumper, like motorhome rollers to keep dragging the tail. That shot was taken on 70 just after you leave 15, and looking off at the mountains in the distance. And, I wish I'd have taken much more time to photograph the car because we didn't capture nearly enough. But we had a long schedule to make every day to make our 7-day gig to the Hot Rod Nationals in Canfield. But when we got we're headed for Peculiar, Missouri, or Missouri, as my grandma called it, to visit Pete and Jake's. They had a party set up and a lot of people, hot rodders from the area. And it started raining, and we hadn't had rain on the entire trip. And it was coming down in a deluge. And no side windows again, no door glass. So it's really getting kind of moist. And we're going across a bridge. I'm driving. And there was so much water. Here's an unknown story. Rob will remember. We hydroplaned.
Oh my goodness.
Cadzilla, and Cadzilla turned about 15 degrees. The whole car pivoted 15 degrees right on a bridge, 2-lane bridge. And I learned early on you don't do anything, as anybody who grows up in the Midwest would know about snow and ice. You don't do anything, you just maintain. And Ken straightened herself out, and we pulled over and boxed the car for the next 15 miles to get to Peter James.
Because you had to change your underwear.
Yeah.
Twice. Twice. I think Rob changed his at least once.
So speaking of, we actually had the Slovers on, both
yes.
Jerry and Jason on a month or so ago.
Wonderful people. I love them.
Excellent people. Yeah, the interview was, I highly recommend going back and listen to that one.
I was fortunate when I worked at Honest Charlie Speed Shop, part of the Coker Group when I was there. I was the sales lead and the guide through the Coker Museum, and met a lot of hot rodders that we all know over the years there. And the Slovers were very close with us because we did a lot of shows, which I saw you at the last show we did over at was it Louisville?
Mm-hmm.
And the Slovers were very close. I sold a lot of their chassis with the help of Mike Goodman and Joe and other people with me at Honest Charlie. And it was then I really came to know the Slovers as these amazingly kind people who enable so many people with affordable product and a love for the hobby. And they would help people walk through the process of building things. And to this day, we're close friends. They were extremely generous with their time. I remember driving, I think Rob was driving Cadzilla and had Slovers in tow with the California Kid. And you think about what are the two of the greatest cars in hot rod history right there. And I have a beautiful shot that was never used looking down the nose of California Kid into the bumper of Cadzilla. They were just an inch apart. And just an art shot that I don't think it ever saw the light of day. And I have several images that we might be able to make prints out of and show whenever you bring Rob together or whatever about the next segment of this. But there's no way to capture the number of events just driving down the road. We're leaving Colorado, and there's an hour into Kansas on 70 is a town, Ellis, Ellis. And we find the Texaco station because it was on our map of where to stop for gas. And we pull into this gas, and within 10 minutes, all the farmers in town with their plaid shirts and Levi's and their well-worked hands are coming into this place in droves because the Mabel, the gal at the front office, called everybody and said, come see this car. So there's a crowd of, it's in the pictures of that. There's probably 10 or 12, 14 people scattered about, and we're talking about the car, and here comes the local constabulary, the local policeman. And he's from New York. He'd been shot on the job, and he decided to retire to Ellis, Kansas, so he wouldn't be shot anymore. That's the way he said it. It's pretty funny. And walks up. Everybody's like, ooh, the man's here. Yeah. He walks up, and I said, do you want to get in? He goes, well, tell me about it. I said, well, it's owned by Billy Gibbons, like ZZ Top. He goes, yeah, that rock star guy. Wow. Yeah, really? Yeah. You want to get in? And he starts to get in, and then he starts back out, and he goes, there aren't any drugs in there, are there? And I said, no, but I reached into my pocket. I said, do you want some? And with that, the crowd burst out laughing, and it made him the most popular policeman in Ellis, Kansas history. It was so funny. So funny. So there's so many stories, and let's finish. I'm not in a hurry to leave today, but you talked about a second segment. There's so many stories to tell. I wouldn't want to take those away from Rob. But easily, in my opinion, and I have a feeling Rob would agree, the ultimate story in Cadzilla was much more than just about a car. It was about human relations, about misunderstandings and bigotry and all the things that we suffer from still. We are in East St. Louis, and what a surprise, we're out of gas again. 100, 125 miles, that was it. Because the tank was at an angle in the trunk to fit And so it didn't fill completely, and it would get about 10 gallons and got about 10 miles to the gallon with that amazing Art Christmas 500-inch Cadillac engine, which was using a fair amount of oil at that point. It was pretty new. I think we'd ridden it hard. But Rob says, we're out of gas. I think he was driving. I said, okay, well, we got off ramp and we crossed the freeway, and we're in the worst ghetto. Growing up in LA, I'd been to Watts and other ghettos and knew what that was about. And here we are in East St. Louis, and there's on the street leading to the gas station, there are burnt out buildings that have been that way for a long time. It was really an amazing statement of poverty. And we pulled into a gas station, and we were the only white guys within miles. And it's a lot of stuff's going on. It was very exciting. And as I get out of the car, a chevron, a V of black gentlemen get off the porch from the gas station and walk towards us. And the guy in the middle, whose name was James, he was huge. At that time, he looked about 9 feet tall because I was scared to death. It was just so much out of my element. And he walks up, and understanding people pretty well, I got my little handheld cassette recorder. And I said, what do you think of the car? I put it, aimed it towards his face. And he says, what do you mean, what do I think of the car? And I said, well, it's owned by Billy Gibbons. And he goes, yeah, that ZZ Top guy. And I said, yeah, and we work for Hot Rod Magazine. He goes, I seen it verbatim. Well, he said, I still have a recorder. And he said, well, what is it? And there was a gentleman with him who was probably 80 years old, very, very slight fellow, white hair. And he said, don't you boys know nothing? This is a 48 Cadillac. He knew exactly what Cadzilla was when most people couldn't tell. And it changed the mode, the feeling instantly. Everybody took interest. When I asked him, what do you think of the car? He didn't, I just aimed it back at him, and that's when the conversation started. And I opened the suicide driver's door, and I said, James, get in. He said, he wiped and kind of like dust his tail. He says, I can't get in there, I'll mess it up. And I said, Billy wanted people to experience this car firsthand, please. He got in that car with such reverence. The way he shut the door was so careful. Other people didn't do that several times through our trip. But he took the time to close it carefully, shuts it, click, click. Then he looks out the window at his friends. He says, hey, boys, how do I look? And it was incredible. People they were spinning and dancing, and it was unbelievable. It was such a wonderful feeling. I'm sure Rob would remember it in the same light. And then it became, who's next? He got out, another guy got in, that guy got in, out. Everybody sat in the car that was in that first group. There were other people around we didn't want anything to do with. They were giving us an attitude, get out of here and stuff. But that didn't matter because we were the guys who were holding the reins. Mm-hmm. And we were there for an hour and talking about all kinds of stuff. And when we opened the hood, which the whole nose moves, that was its own separate, amazing response. I can still see it. It was truly unique. I've never felt something like that, like I'm feeling right now. It was an amazing time for me. And there was no black-white thing, nothing about finance, nothing about up and down, sideways. It was just car guys. And it was the absolute best opportunity I've ever had to realize that we're all the same. We all have stuff. We all have problems. But when it comes to commonality, that's when you realize we are the same. And
yeah, you come across, you meet all these people at car shows and you shooting and good guys and all that stuff, that it's all walks of life. I've done cars for probably close to billionaires, to millionaires, to guys that had to know exactly how much it was going to be, and they showed up with that exact money. Who was that one guy with the most messed? He ran funeral parlors. We freshened up a car. You talk about a guy with a messed up sense of humor.
Was he out of Brownsville, Texas?
No, that guy, he was from Illinois, like LaSalle, Peru, area, something. And I still hear from him every once in a while. So yeah.
Well, it was the funniest part, not the funniest was the conversations in between, the responses. They had us on our back feet. It was just so much fun. And then one of them said, "How are you getting out of town?" And I think I said, maybe it was Rob, "We're going to drive around until we find an on-ramp and then head east." And he just shook his head. He said, "No, you can't do that around here. You get in trouble."
Mm-hmm.
So all seven of them, whatever it was, piled into a 70-inch Camaro and led us out of town about 40 miles east with our tow guy behind us, Jack behind us, and his truck and trailer. But it showed that they had such reverence and understanding and appreciation for Cadzilla and us too.
So you were on the Illinois side of East St. Louis then, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I know some of that neighborhood. There used to be a really good place for punk rock shows that we'd go down there, Pops, right off the interstate. And allegedly there was a really good gentleman's club there. But we go to punk rock shows there and then get out of town. So yeah. There was some.
That was the high point to me of the trip. That's the memory that comes to mind most often when people have asked me. It's amazing how I remember when we were in Effingham, Illinois, which was where Hot Rod Magazine was printed at the time. That's a big printing house city. And a friend of Jack showed up. He comes over in his 50 Merc, which was so classic, DeSoto grill, black with flames. We've seen a lot of those. I bet the fellow didn't spend 10 seconds looking at Cadzilla. He just wanted to show us a poster of his car and talk about his car, and didn't care about the amazing thing that Cadzilla is and was and always will be. Unique in itself, an incredible design statement, incredible functioning art piece. To me, is a lot of people who are all about cars don't even include that in their list. To me, that is an amazing thing from any coach builder in the world would appreciate it. But it's just how people are, and to see people who really appreciated it, who didn't come from that world, they didn't have customs, they didn't have nice cars, they didn't have a lot of anything, I would presume, in their neighborhood. And that's why it stands out to me, because it was the commonality we have, the love we have, to show for one another's appreciation in our cars, in how we dealt with them and talked about them. And that was the high point of in many ways, of my on-road career, maybe in my entire career in hot rodding. I did a lot with good guys over 77 editions, 8 years that I was with them. A lot of fun things that we've done. But that one East St. Louis trip in Cadzilla was pretty much the capital, because of a car that was so the antithesis, the opposite of the environment we were in. It's so well appreciated. It was really, it almost brings me to tears to this day.
So yeah, Cadzilla always comes up at least in everybody's top 5 customs, if not top 5 cars of all times. I have talked about him before. He does not like Cadzilla, and me and the other guys that are friends with him said, "Sorry, we can't talk to you anymore."
Who is that?
He's 25. He doesn't, he wasn't even
He's not
born.
real smart.
Yeah, he doesn't listen to these anyway.
No.
He's 25, just his own hot rod shop. He didn't like the Rad Rides car that just won America's Most Beautiful Roadsters, one of the most
the 36
amazing cars ever built from scratch. And he's like, yeah,
absolutely. Every part was handmade, right? Except for 2 pieces, everything was handmade.
Yeah,
that car is incredible.
It's absolutely incredible. But
Troy's the man. I mean, he's hard to beat. He's a wonderful person. He's community oriented. He's special.
Great
guys.
Yeah, his guys that work there. He's got a handful of young fabricators. They're some of the nicest guys you ever want to meet.
I think there was one fellow in particular who was pivotal in that car. He was like the key.
Adam and Cody. Adam actually was on the Roadster Shop Does Oil and Whiskey podcast. And Adam was on there for 2 hours. And I told Adam, I go, it's both inspiring, but yet, fuck you, Adam. Troy says,
it's hard to match.
Troy says, I've never
do nice work. So
he even does the upholstery. He's not just the metal guy. He does the upholstery.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, Yeah, and people don't get that. And one of the things people didn't like about Cadzilla, which I find completely special about it, is the moon tank in the front,
Mm-hmm.
2.5 gallon tank, whatever that was.
Mm-hmm.
We sold them at Honest Charlie's. I sold a lot of those in various sizes to
Mm-hmm.
guys with deuces and stuff. But and people occasionally, maybe 1 out of 50, would say, "Isn't that like the one that Cadzilla had?" People didn't understand that because it was originally, I think, some of the original concept was to take it to Bonneville maybe and do something,
Uh-huh.
but they couldn't do that eventually because of what it became. But I don't know that total story. I think that's something to talk with Erickson or Nath or one
Yeah.
of Boyd's guys about. But um, it's I don't know. I think Cadzilla summed up what hot rodding has always been about. And if people don't get it, that's okay. I don't like rap music, and I always say I don't understand it rather than I don't like it, because many things that I don't understand I don't like because I'm not familiar. But yet, I think the truth is that if we open our minds to everything like that, creative things, there's always a benefit to be found. And Cadzilla was a life changer for many people. I'm sure it led other people to craftsmanship. And I hope the story was enough to enable people to realize their own dream, because
Yeah,
that's the
we're gonna
love.
get Randy Lorenzen on here, which he actually did the photo shoot with the band, and he
That's
told a
right.
story when he was on Chris Coddington's podcast. He goes, they had this all prepared, and there's a story. We're gonna get Randy on here, so I'm not gonna tell all of his stories, but the band showed up. Billy was already there, and I think it was Frank Beard gets out of his limo, and he's like, "You got me for an hour," because they didn't like that Billy was making money off this car, off the band's name, because it was Billy's car. And Randy's like, "Oh man, we've been here for so many days. We've got costume changes." And Frank looked at him and says, "You now have 58 minutes." So they rushed
Uh-huh.
band pictures. And he goes, "But like the day or two before, when they were going to deliver the car, it was like the record label or the management team, they made them show a huge insurance policy that Hot Rod had to have for them to have care of the car." And again, I'm not going to, it was big numbers. I'm going to let Randy tell that story. And they're like, "Is that car really worth that?" So, yeah. So as,
And I never knew that story. I didn't know any of that. So
yeah, it's a pretty good story, but I'm going to let Randy tell that. I'm not going to steal his thunder on that. But so like we've got friends that last week's podcast was our buddy, a BMX guy that went to the Olympics twice. He never won a medal, but that whole rest of your life, you'll always be known as an Olympian. And that to me as a car fan, it's that big of a deal that you and Rob Canan will always be known as the guys that drove Cadzilla across the country. I mean,
the only people.
yeah, that's epic. That is totally epic. I mean, yeah. Okay, so you're at Hot
Yeah,
Rod.
there's so many. Just go ahead. Yeah, please.
If you got anything else before we move on from Cadzilla?
The most fun thing I probably ever did in a race car, because it's more fun to ride. I did a lot of petty driving experiences with good guys from the passenger seat, and there's nothing like letting a person who knows how to drive take you around Charlotte, Texas Motor Speedway, places like that at speed. It's incredible. You don't know anything. You think you're a driver until you race with a racer. But they just so I'm in Michigan for a Chevrolet function. Junior Johnson was there. Many people were there. Rusty Wallace was there, and they had a prototype Firebird that Pontiac had created that had a twin turbo 350 in it. And it was set up. It had suspension and everything, but it still looked kind of like a street car. And my round came. I always loved when you're with people who are great, you can kid them because they know more than you do. And we did a couple of laps around Michigan, both on the oval and on the infield, which is a road racing course, quite curvy. And we came in off of one of the laps. You come off of turn 3, if I'm not mistaken, and then into the infield. You're cooking. I think we were doing a 170 or something on the backstretch. And Michael's in his element. I mean, this guy won Daytona twice. He was just, I think he was with Billy Gibbons on the Atlanta covers this past weekend because Billy started the race. And after that lap, that I don't know, second or third lap, I had to say to Michael Waltrip, "Is that the best you can do? Is that it?" He looks over at me like, well, you know what he was thinking. I won't say it. And he proceeds to get after it on the next lap. And his foot's coming through the radiator. He is on this thing. Pop-off valves going. It was incredible. And we go out on the infield, and in the second corner, he dips his right front tire on the grass and proceeds to do a 720 at speed. I mean, we're doing still 70, 80 miles an hour, I'm guessing. And as all race drivers could do, as I would have panicked and ended up flipping the car in a mud bath, he keeps his eye in the direction of the travel, regardless of which way the car was going, and is at just the right point of the second rotation. He nails it and puts it right back on the track, and it was like nothing ever happened. And when we get into the pits, he looks over and he goes, "How was that?" that was another one of those things that doesn't happen in life. And I've always respected him greatly. He raced at Le Mans many years. He had his own Ferrari, 458. I think he used at Le Mans a few years. Amazing guys, and that's the people I've always admired. That I was able to meet all these people. That I got to shoot with Roy Brizio. Brizio was his family. I want to say this: the Brizio family I'd known since I was young, because they were the Bay Area Roadsters and Magoo was in the LA Roadsters at the time. And they were great friends, and they'd meet and would go to the LA Roadster show, and I'd meet the Brizios, Sue and Andy, and their young son. And then when I moved to work for Good Guys, Kathy and I moved there, our first one, and Kim, Roy's sister, connected me with the neighborhood. They found an apartment for me. They introduced me at Good Guys. Kimmy was always very special. I know you know her as well. And through the years, Roy opened more doors to great owners, great people with some supercars, plus his own guys who I did many stories with, who were always congenial and kind and helpful. And through Roy, I met Sid Shavers, who taught me how to upholster a car. I didn't do it, but I knew the procedures. I knew
You introduced us to Sid Shavers, and that's back when
really
on upholstery. And so if she ever got stuck in a thing, she could call Sid, and Sid would call her back and help her through a thing because you introduced us to Sid Shavers.
I didn't remember that. Thank you. Yeah. That's nice.
Yeah.
Sid was the best of people, is the best. And one of his guys that worked for him, and I'm not getting his name right now, was absolutely martial artist, was absolutely central to me learning the rest of it. When Sid was busy with doing a business or one thing or another, Sid was incredible. Another was Steve Mole. Steve Mole was an incredible person, built cars like nobody else. Literally, they were unique to him and his crew. And he was like others, like Roy Brizio. He would never mention a customer by name. He would refer to this car, this project, but he was always good about keeping the private side private. And I always admired that greatly, because some people drop names. I've done it. Some people drop names to be somebody, and those guys didn't need to be somebody, they were somebody. I admired them greatly, because even Grandma Betty, Sue Brizio's mother, was my daughter's babysitter for many years. And so the Brizio family has been pivotal in my life, and I hope they're hearing this, because they mean very much. Roy is absolutely in the top caliber of people. His cars, your drivers, incredible. And I'm very thankful to him and all of the people, the industry, for accepting me and putting up with me being me. And because I can be a pain, I know you don't know it, but I can be a pain too. And, I was very lucky that I've met so many good people, including you and Carrie. We've been down many roads together, and we've talked how many times, spent meals together. And I'm so thankful for the life I've had, for this opportunity tonight to share with people some of the stories that maybe they haven't heard. And I would love to hear them from Rob Canan's standpoint very much. He's a very special person. He grew up right here. He grew up a few miles away from where I ended up in my life, here in Greeley, Colorado. He was in Fort Collins, a half an hour away, where he grew up. And yeah, what a life. I could have never planned it. If I'd have gone to school to study it, I bet I wouldn't have done it. That's the funny part. If I'd have studied journalism, I would have never made it to Hot Rod Magazine.
Yeah. Okay,
Maybe,
so
maybe not.
how much longer were you at Hot Rod before you went to Good Guys?
I was there from 88 to 92.
Okay.
And then I'd had it with management, the corporate side of Peterson. And that was as much me as them. It wasn't anything in particular, but I'd had enough. And so I went and visited Gary in Maryland and applied for the job. And they didn't need an editor for the Gazette. They had someone doing it, but they didn't have a background as I did. And they were doing their best. And initially, I went in and I sold swap meet space at Good Guys events, and that was certainly not my forte. And I did okay at it, but it was always a challenge to mark the spots, keep the money straight, all the things, and it was just not my thing. And then one day, Gary called me in his office and said, "We want you to take over the Gazette."
Who I don't remember who was like the main guy at the Gazette before you got the main gig at the
Well, John Drummond was always integral with it because he's such a creative sport. He was always the voice, as you know all too well, of Good Guys.
Yeah.
He is great. I like John a lot. We're very good friends. I haven't talked to him in a while, but we'll always be close because we held the same spot. And there was another fellow by the name of Tim, and he was kind of running it and wasn't fond of me from the day I started and did his best to derail me for 2 years. And I won't go into other names, but he did a lot to hurt me, and it eventually cost him. He lost his position because of it. And Gary and Marilyn finally realized what was going on, and so a downside of that. But working with Good Guys was its own separate challenge because you're traveling, and I did the Gazette pretty much by myself. I had an art department.
They do what, 18 events now, and they were doing a little
16, more. Something like that. I was thinking it was about the same because they had the California events, a bunch of them in Pleasanton, some Formosa or Sonoma, and it was too much. And so when I was on the road, I was still writing in my room many a time, getting stories done, and then come back and have to finish it up before you go out again. And it became difficult, challenging, and problematic for my wife. It affected my marriage. And I chose that. That wasn't anybody's fault at Good Guys. I chose to take on that challenge, and they gave me every opportunity to do what I wanted. And it helped me grow my skills greatly. And I'm always thankful to Gary and Marilyn and Mark for giving me those opportunities, for being patient with me, because deadlines were always difficult. There was so much to do and not enough time. I many times didn't leave until the next day. You finish at 5 a.m. and everybody else is getting there a few hours after. And it was certainly a lot. And then I'd had enough of that, and it cost me my marriage. And I was time to change. And John Diana, who I left Hot Rod Magazine because of.
Okay, before we leave the Good Guys section, you were there because Randy Lorenzen was part of the first ever Hot Rod Magazine swimsuit issue. We'll let him tell the story of that. The first cover model, he's still married to today, Stevie.
That's right. I forgot that. Yeah.
And this was in your tenure at the Good Guys. You did your own swimsuit issue.
Oh, yeah.
People still talk about that. I'm still friends with the guy that was in it. Yes, that's right. I said guys. They wanted to be different than Hot Rod Magazine. They had a couple of the guys have passed away. The guy from Illinois that has passed away.
The guy was on the cover of the Gazette with his purple Buick. Wasn't it a purple Buick Custom?
Yeah.
Side pipes.
A purple Model A with white stripes. I'm still friends with that guy. There was a guy with a...
Steve Ralphs was in it.
Oh, he was. I forgot about. And then another guy from Illinois. You must have shot it either at Des Moines or Indy because it was all Midwestern dudes. But there was one pot-bellied and a Speedo when you open...
Woof.
Yeah. But people still...
You know how much crap I took over that?
It was epic. It was awesome.
I took a lot of crap, and people never got the real meaning. Was pretty straightforward. I remember having shot lots of cars at events, I knew a lot of folks, and I'd shoot 10 or 12 or 15 in a 3 or 4 day period. And I'm talking to one of the wives, and she complained about swimsuit editions. She said, it's always for the guys. I mean, women like to see some skin too. And she's laughing, and we're laughing. And I thought, well, shoot, let's do a cover with a bunch of ugly, fat dudes on it in their cars, laying on the running boards, and very gross stuff. And I took some flack. Everybody thought I was gay for a little while, I think, because it's like, what the? You don't do that. I remember Pete Forrest had it on his desk one day and he just shook his head. Like, what the? And so that's what we did, is we got them all together. And then if you recall, each article went by weight. So the biggest guy, it said, coming in at 2 metric tons. I think it was a half a metric ton. The guy weighed 500 pounds.
Yeah, and that was, I used to go to he had a car party.
Out of Peoria?
Yeah, it was Peoria.
Oh, I know.
That's the guy that's passed away. Then the other friend by Bloomington, that I gave my award at that one show. Nicest guy you ever want to meet. But yeah, like I thought I was probably 26, 27, and half of those guys I grew up at local rod runs knowing these guys. So yeah,
sure.
One of the funniest things I ever seen. So yeah.
I to this day I cringe because it just tweaks me in just the weirdest way. It just something about it a lot of people didn't get. And it was, I have a sense of humor that will go way past the normal just to get people to react, just to get somebody to laugh. And that was what that was about to me, when I'm looking at cars and with swimsuit editions or whether it was Hot Rod or other books, I'm like, get out of the way. I want to see the car. Mm-hmm. If I want to look at women, I'll look at books with pretty women. Mm-hmm. I love that too. But in this case, I really like cars on their own. I was never a swimsuit fan. I think they're great. And Hot Rod swimsuit editions had the finest looking girls ever in that kind of stuff. They were beautiful and wonderful people. And it was cool. It was when you're talking with Randy or whomever, ask who initialized the swimsuit concept. That's a whole story itself I'm not going to share with you because it's unique where the credit went and where it all started.
Yeah, he was on the Chris Coddington one, but we're going to get him on and hopefully elaborate on that. It's a crazy story on how it started and, like you say, got credit and who didn't get credit, and yeah.
Yeah, I was just so lucky, and going to Buckaroo in the end, we did some really nice books. One of the things that changed publishing was we went, because of Stephen Lorca, our art director at Buckaroo, one of them, but the key guy for me. He was incredible. He still is. He has a photography business down in the Chattanooga area to this day. And he's an amazingly crafty person. And he's the one who enabled Buckaroo to get to newsstand weeks ahead of Street Rodder and others, because we went direct to plate, direct to the printer from his computer. Nobody had ever done that, but because he was young and he knew the future was coming, and he figured out how to get our books to print very much ahead of Street Rodder, which didn't make certain people very happy.
So that was something on Buckaroo. It was.
Wait, before we go into Buckaroo, I want to ask a question.
Please. Yeah, you haven't said anything.
Yeah, I've been really quiet over here. And I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit. So I would like to know your first remembrance, I guess, if that's a word, of us. Like, when do you remember, like, what's your first, do you remember your first, I don't want to say impression, but first time that you met us or remember us? What was that for you?
Des Moines.
With our
I believe we were in Des Moines.
What did you think?
Probably with our purple 54.
Don't lead him on. Let him talk.
He's seen a lot of.
I was thinking I was seeing 53, but if that was a 54, okay.
I had a 53 bumper on
it. Okay. Yeah. And it was then that at that same event that I met Josh Michelin.
Mm-hmm.
See,
you knew Josh already.
Yeah.
We've had Josh on here. Unfortunately, the sound was so bad we have to.
So
we're going to redo it, but we have a Steve Anderson section as a it's a we have to redo it because it had a weird echo to it. But yeah, Josh owes a lot thanks to you of what you did for him.
Well, that was because of his grandparents, not as much his parents, but his grandparents were
Well, his
pivotal in his
grandpa was the
understanding.
coolest guy. His
Yeah.
grandpa was so
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely cool. Yeah, and we would sit. When you never took a break at Good Guys because there's too much to do. Everybody's working 110%. But I remember a few times having a pork loin sandwich or something, or a cherry Coke with his grandpa, and we'd walk around. And then his grandpa and grandma would take off on their own, and Josh would follow with me, and we'd talk about stuff. And it was at Des Moines that he shot a 50 Ford shoebox. It was the first car he ever shot, and he did it with my Mamiya 6.7, and in a side alley there at Des Moines. And that, I think, was the first thing that Josh Mishler ever shot. And he went on to be his own person. He far surpassed me in his photographic skills, as did many people. Tommy Lee Bird at Buckaroo was a native of Little Dayton, Tennessee.
I see Tommy at a lot of events.
He's a good guy. He's always been very proper, and his folks are great. And his wife was a good friend at Buckaroo. And,
he never really answered your question, did he? He kind of glassed over that.
I tried to get. I don't. Honest to goodness, I can't. Very few people can I remember when we met. I remember many times when we had meals, and when we were in Malibu, we drove down to a place in town there and had a nice meal. But I don't remember specifics sometimes about many times because there's so much going on. That sounds like an excuse, maybe it is, but
I remember
at a place like Des Moines, you're busy.
Detroit area, they did that Chrysler sponsored show up there, and we just had a
Meadowbrook.
Yeah, with the DeSoto, we had a leaking fitting. We couldn't get the fitting; it was leaking transmission fluids. We parked it in the grass and just left it. And you're like, "Hey, let's get the car. Let's go. I'll take you to McDonald's." Well, you took us to Macaroni Grill. It's the first time we Midwestern farm kids ever went to Macaroni Grill. They're singing. You can draw on the paper thing. Fancy Italian. I mean, that was like, oh my God, this is like the fanciest place we ever been to. It was the Macaroni Grill. I mean, it's still a very good place to eat. It's not McDonald's, but yeah, it's a little Olive Garden.
You see this little car I'm holding here?
Mm-hmm.
At that show you're talking about, which was the Chrysler sponsored show, and we had a Prowler we were giving away, and it was at Meadowbrook, which was the Dodge family estate. And I was touching it. They had a early Ram prototype truck there. It had so many cool features that they never used because it was so advanced. And I was checking out the tie downs in the bed, and a guy behind me says, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't touch that." And it's Tom Gale, the head vice president of Chrysler, head of design. Prowler, Viper, minivan. This guy was pivotal.
And a real hot rod guy.
And a real hot rod guy. I remember when Gary and some other folks went to his shop in Detroit or in Michigan where he lived. He had a home shop that was just killer, and he made these little models for good guys for special awards at that event. Well, I'm looking at the truck. Tom yells out, "What are you doing?" I turn around, and he's there with his wife, Chucky. And I didn't know them at all. I'd met him once, but I didn't know him at all. Had never met Chucky. And he said, "Could you give my wife some help photographically? She needs some advice, and you know what you're doing. Can you walk around a little bit?" Sure. He went off to do something. We walked around for an hour and talked about photography and saw Gary and Marilyn and talked with them. And then we were done. And then one day in the mail, I get this model I just showed you, which is a pewter covered plastic, I think. And he gave it to me for helping his wife. And it was it's a small thing, but it's those small things that mean a great deal because he remembered what had transpired. And I'm very lucky that I have had those experiences with you and others that I don't remember all those things. There's just too many. And it's not to take anything away because the friendship we've had has outlasted a lot of people. Let's just say.
Because you were like I remember, like we've been to dinner a handful of times through the years at events. we're
Yeah.
going to bed. You got to stay up and write stories and captions and stuff because you had a deadline coming up. It's like you were balls to the wall the whole time. So one of my other things, not really car show related, that I learned. What did we learn at that event, Carrie? We learned what a Michigan left was. You know, you don't first day, you don't turn left at the you go down and then they have a U-turn thing. With our truck and trailer, we pulled left. People are honking and flipping us off. It's
Yeah,
like,
we
what
learned
did
it
we
the
do
hard
wrong?
way.
It was green. And it's like we learned what a Michigan left was when we got to the hotel that night. So,
Wasn't green for you.
Yeah.
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 But I remember that trip,
I,
we barely had money to go to that event. I wanted to go because we had the DeSoto, wanted to go to the Chrysler event. And we had a hotel, but we had peanut butter sandwiches. And on the way there and the way back, because it was a long drive to Detroit from Illinois, we slept, instead of getting a hotel traveling, we slept in the back of our Suburban. We had a half-ton Suburban. Even with the sway bars, you couldn't go over 53 mile an hour. Otherwise, it just starts. Yeah, that was, I remember that trip. But yeah.
So
well, I have a funny story. Maybe. Oh, go ahead, Carrie, please.
one of my favorite, I guess, memories is a conversation that you and I had many, 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 many years ago, when somebody at Good Guys, I don't remember who it was, asked me to be a trophy girl one year. And I think I came to you first, and I was like, I don't know, I can't do that. That's not me. I don't do that. And you gave me some advice, as a female in the industry, and I have taken that advice to heart, and I've used it ever since. And the fact of, and actually, a coworker that I have now that you used to work with, made a comment to me a couple weeks ago when we were talking about something, and how people will never remember the giggle and the wiggle. They'll remember, the true, as a female, the true person. So don't worry about the short shorts and just be yourself, and people will remember that. That's one of the things that I remember all the time is
So
that.
I don't remember that. Thank you for saying so. I don't remember that, Carrie.
Yeah, and that's something as a female in this industry, which is really hard a lot of times.
Yes.
You had given me some of the best advice that has taken me so far, as a female in this industry. That's
to show off your giggle and your wiggle?
no, not to. It's like people aren't going to remember that. They're going to remember the true person. They're going to remember the car person. They're going to remember the female that was doing the upholstery, not the one that was doing the giggle and the wiggle attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. And I'm going to say, because I have a feeling that some of the people in your audience, because you're so humble, that they don't realize what you've done for so many people, especially young people, not just in BMX or whatever it was that you did personally as hobbies, but in the work you've done since, especially with young women. I think is needs to be noted, needs to be recognized by people, that not enough people reach out to those who aren't necessarily mainstream or seen as mainstream. They're not guys with incredible mechanical skills. They're people like everyday folks who have some skills. I'm not very skilled. I don't have any of the skills that most fabricators have. I've admired it well, and I've been able to tell the stories. I understand technical, but I can't do it. But you're a person who gets involved and helps people on many levels that I think should be brought out. I think that would be its own
This Good Guy
separate episode.
Award was actually given to Tim and Carrie. We're still the only husband and wife team to ever get the Trendsetter together, even though they always, when they give the Trendsetter, now I'm the MC for the Trendsetter at SEMA. And
Yes.
when they mention people, they leave Carrie's name off when they put it in print and stuff. So she always reminds them, hey, I was on that awards.
Yeah, you should, Carrie, because I can't think of too many people.
I do it because I love it. And that's normally every time I get in trouble at work and every time I get talking to, it's because I have too much passion. And I care too
No, you
much.
don't.
I care.
You don't. You care just enough, just the right amount. People have a hard time with that who aren't passionate. They have a hard time with other people who are. They don't know how to. It makes them uncomfortable. But
Yep.
what you've done, you've touched so many people. What you just told me about helping you have done exponentially for countless others. And aren't we lucky, all of us, that we've been able to do it? You do it, Tim, when you speak at events, when you talk with people, you have an understanding of the subject. You're like a little kid talking to them because they are too, men and women. And you both have that. You've had it for a long time, and you've stayed together in an industry that's hard to stay together in because there's a lot of money going on. There's lots of things and challenges and time or shortages thereof. So what you've both done in this industry should be recognized as it is with others too. But it's our relationship that has lasted all these years. And as you said much earlier in our conversation tonight, once my camera was no longer used for that, once I wasn't doing my writing as I had, I still do stuff, but not like it was. You're pretty much out of the circle. And it's just life. It's how it happens. It's in every field. And when you stop being a race driver, rock star, you have this quiet life that, you don't do those things. You don't hang in the same crowds. You don't go crazy like you did. And you tend to appreciate the softer things. Today, I do a small column here for the 50 plus marketplace, which is for old folks. I do a monthly column of 300 words that's about happy things, about what to celebrate about a new season, and to stay out of the heavy because we've had too much of that over recent years. And now is a good time for our country, for our hobby, for all of us. And I think it's a really great time to be. I consider myself back to the very beginning of the story and how my parents nurtured me and brought me up with this. I've had a dream life. I haven't had money and cars, a lot of stuff that people would value, and I don't care. I care that I've been able to touch others and help people like yourselves, doing articles that help the magazines, that help me get my job done, but that also was able to be helpful to individuals with small shops, garages, backyard, lean-tos, building really cool cars, and in every part of the country. And to me, that's the crux of the sport. There are the Boyd Covingtons and Chip Fooses and all of these great people who've done amazing things. But the substance, the fabric of hot rodding is people like yourselves who love it, who do it initially because they love it, not for the money. It became a business for you, good. And it has for many people, and some more than others. But it's more about the experience. And as we all know, the thing that makes hot rodding what it is the people, the relationships. The cars become secondary, and we get together and we have tailgate parties and all that stuff right at the event, right at the beautiful Des Moines Fairgrounds, at Sonoma, wherever it was, across the country. It's always the same. Well, I remember the parking lot at Indy every year is always a car show in itself.
Oh, yeah. That was the best.
That's the best. That's probably the best evening thing. I mean, it used to be great at many events, but that's probably one of the best because of the way it worked. And I am extremely blessed and very thankful that I've had the life I've had, that I've come to know the people I've known. And the fact that we don't do things still, that's how all friendships are. Things come and go. You'll always have the appreciation. We'll always be close. And you guys in particular are so kind of you to have me with you talking about these things tonight. I hope we have the opportunity again. And maybe by the next one, I'll have my book out because I'm working on something that's pretty cool, I think. Of course, I would think that. It's mine. And we're going to see how that goes here. It's involving some other people in it. And it'll be a new look at hot rodding that may not have been done before. So
yeah, I know a little bit. We've had a discussion. I'm sworn to secrecy, but I can't wait to see it. So
we're excited.
I'm a print and a book collector, and I have a big section of signed books from people. And so I expect to add a signed Steve Anderson book to my book collection.
And that too is $500.
Yeah.
And we would happily pay.
I'll tell you, it's its own thing. I've never done that. I've never done my own publishing. I've always worked for others. So now is the time to do something I know I can.
We're excited.
Very cool.
Yep.
So we touched
this has been great.
The Buckaroo stuff. Let's wrap up the Buckaroo thing. How long were you there? It was John Diana, That's when you jumped in for your
Hmm.
question. He was at Hot Rod and everything, and he started Buckaroo and ended up moving it to Tennessee.
Tennessee.
That's how you ended up in Tennessee. How long? I dug out some the other day because the guy bought one of our old cars from like 2003, and I found the Street Rod Builder, which it was in the poster and all these pictures of construction. You guys really put out a great magazine with a lot of tech and a lot of fold out. I mean, because everybody remembers this issue is a ridiculous, great issue. You know, there's one at Rad Rides, the pull out in Hot Rod. And then nobody was doing that. And you guys started doing that again in Street Rod Builder. So how long did the Buckaroo magazines? There was Street Rod Builder, Truck Builder. There was a boat magazine. Was there one more in there?
I was the editor simultaneously, though I don't want to be incorrect in how I tell that. John Diana controlled the shots. He was the mastermind behind what he wanted to happen. And we were smart enough to let him do it. John was his own kind of person, but he was brilliant. He was many time NHRA winner in
Mm-hmm.
stock classes with an engine he built. He was very, very good at what he did. And he, without his power, without his aggression, nature of his personality, many things wouldn't have happened, including Buckaroo, because we started in 2000, and I was going from Good Guys, and Gary actually guessed it. You know, he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm not saying." He goes, "You're not going to Buckaroo, are you? Because you came here because of John Diana." I said, "Yes, I am. Yes, I am." And he said, "Berger is too." He went to work at the same time I did. He did Street Rod Builder. John gave me the helm. Well, again, I didn't do the books. I didn't do the planning. That was more John, and I was then in on it. But I was the editor of Super Rod, Chevy Rumble, Diesel Builder. At the same time, I produced 95 printed pages a month for them for 8 years, and give or take, sometimes less, never more.
Mm-hmm.
And again, trying to be as honest as I can be. I disappointed John early on with deadline problems and things because of stuff that was in my life then. And we overcame those and produced a lot of good books. Some of my best works and others' best works, Jerry Berger's best works, were in there, and a lot of John's opinion. And it raised the ire of other magazine people I won't go into, but they had a hard time with our approach to doing business. And it was eight years though I was there, and then John and I got into it on a couple of things, and I realized it was my time to leave, and that's when I left publishing in '08. And
How much longer? They didn't last much longer than that, though, after you left, though, did they?
a lot of complexities I don't know about. Let's just put it that way. Things went on that I don't know about because I wasn't there. I
Yeah.
left on excellent terms with the money side of the company, those people, and with John. I left it on a very proper note because I've always been thankful of anybody I've worked for and always leave thanking them for
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity. And I had failed John on some opportunities, deadlines, things that cost us money. And so I took credit for those things. It's my own stupidity or whatever. And that's just my nature. Good or bad, that's how I am. So John and I were always conversive after that, I could say. And then he had something occur. He had a fall or a stroke or something in Dallas, I think. And he never fully recovered and eventually passed from that. But people should be thankful because a lot of the things that Peterson's magazines were, the automotive group, which he was the head of, he was the guy in charge. It wouldn't have happened without him. And he was just, Gary Case and all those people were close to him. He worked with them on lots of stuff. And I was lucky enough to have been in his presence, and we weren't always the most fond of each other, but at the same time, we worked things out and came to an understanding. And then that was it. I was on to other things, and I've been too retired for quite a while, so that's why I've led back to what I know how to do. And this book will be done pretty soon.
Yeah. How long were you at Honest Charlie's? You worked because you were in Tennessee. You worked at the Coker Group owner. Honest Charlie was the speed shop there. You were there for a few years, right?
4 years. 4 years. And then I would do the shows with Mike Goodman and with other people as well. And we would take the 40-foot trailer and the dually crew cab and go to Hershey, Carlisle, Daytona, Louisville, and we would set up our portable store, either outdoors at those events up north or indoors, as in Louisville and Columbus. And it was really helpful. Mike Goodman was another person in my life who has given me opportunities that I don't think I've ever been offered or had the opportunity to try. And being the former Marine that he is, he taught me a lot about what you are capable of. And we could set up entire shows in a short time and work those shows. And I learned a lot about sales. And then early on, they gave me the post, Corky, Coker, and Mike, of running the museum tours, of which I did for the 4 years. I probably took 15 or 20,000 people through that museum twice a day, in between sales at the desk on Charlie. So that was its own separate thing. But I was always, again, thankful to those who allowed it. That Corky gave this position to somebody he didn't know. And Mike Goodman helped me on many levels, and I helped him finish his beautiful log home on the Tennessee River, which taught me a lot about things I didn't know. He's one of the pivotal people in my life, Mike Goodman. He was one of the guys at SEMA for a long time, for some period. He's done a lot in his life, and I don't know too many people who were more straightforward and more capable than Mike Goodman. So it just goes on and on and on. I could thank all the people, but tonight I just want to thank you again for having me join you, for making this possible. It's been a lot of fun, and I'd like to do it again. I just, again, want to express that how much hot rodding has made my life what it is. It wasn't always ideal, but in the end, I've had a dream job to meet special people like yourselves and to go places I would have never been to, and to have experiences the guys dream of. I can't tell you how many people have said, you had the dream job. It wasn't a dream in how much time it takes and what it costs your family, which I gave up. That's still an issue today. It doesn't make you a lot of money because you're working 80-hour weeks. But I did stuff that nobody gets to do. And it still lives with me today. And I actually have a nickname with the guys I go to coffee and Bible studies with. They call me Cars. Because, of course, the only thing I can talk about is cars. So,
yeah, I've said that many times. It's like, well, so my 31st year running my hot rod shop, and there's a guy online, he's celebrating his 20th, and I was like, man, congrats. This is a hard business to be in, hot rods. My family still thinks I need a real job. That's why they like my racing. My dad, even though he's a hot rodder, he still gives little, like, you still gonna build cars? Like, because, small town Midwest conservative people, they have hot rods, but they don't understand, people are making money building hot rods, but we're not getting rich. But we get to go to a lot of places. We've met a lot of awesome people. I've met people at car shows. Kenny Davis from Arkansas. I met him when I was 17 or 18 at the Street Machine Nationals. I'm still friends with him and his wife today. I've met quite a few.
So it's the good and the bad.
Yeah, Kenny's a trip if you know Kenny. But
I remember Kenny, absolutely.
Yeah, I still stay in touch with him, see him at events, and we've all met quite a few assholes. We wish we would have walked down a different row that day or not took that customer car in the shop. But majority of people, I say a good strong 85% people are still pretty awesome. And like we say, it brings all walks of life together. If you shut off the news and you go out and see people in the world, it's still not a bad place.
That's right, Tim. Yeah. Gary, that's exactly right. There's so many worse things we could do. And a lot of people will hack on, who don't know cars, will hack on the money spent that could be better used towards charities or whatever. But funny enough, a lot of the people, the Troys, the Bobby Alloways, the others, you guys, who through their hobby have been able to do things for their community. And I think that is paramount to life, is doing for others. It's not having, it's not getting, it's giving and loving and being and sharing with other people who don't have the opportunity. And nothing feels better than to give somebody some ink, and when they've never even thought of having that happen. To see someone's, when I was with my wife, Linda, my second wife in Tennessee, and we photographed a guy's really killer 55 Chevy. And my wife got to be with me when we shot it, and then she watched me write it, and we made it as the cover car that month for Super Rod. And then we went to P.F. Chang's for dinner. These people had never been to P.F. Chang's, kind of like you were talking about Macaroni Grill. They're like, we've never had Chinese food before. This guy was very hillbilly, but like a lot of hillbillies, he was also worked at, where was it, in Knoxville there, that used to be a nuclear, where they developed a nuclear bomb. This guy was a welder there. He was incredibly technical. And we went to dinner, and then we talked about it. We said we were hoping we could get the car on the cover, but I'm not sure if it's going to happen. And then we pulled the magazine out and handed it to him. It's the only time I've ever seen somebody receive a magazine with their car on the cover, and they didn't know about it.
Hmm.
I've never been able to see someone do that.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife got to see it. She said, "You changed those people's lives. They were crying at the dinner table." I said, "That's the joy of my job, is that I could bring these people something they hadn't had." And
see, we've been like in a whole lot of magazines, and thank to you a lot too. And even this last time, the Chevelle back here, Brian Brennan gave it the cover a year and a half ago. When he told me it was getting the cover, it was at an event. I just stood up and I hugged him. You know, this is a car me and my dad built together, and to me, magazines still mean a lot, almost more, not more, but I've always been a magazine guy, and that was always my goal as a kid, to get a car in a magazine, not to win some big award. But yeah, thanks to guys like you make people, like, I remember the first time I got a picture in Popular Hot Rodding, 3 months later, the phone was ringing enough that I started my shop full time. I mean, the magazines aren't as big as they used to be, but it still helps everybody.
Works.
Yeah,
it does. It does. It's yep. It's what's funny. You talk about your magazine. Excuse me. 3 years ago, I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment here, and it's great. I love it. It's fantastic. But it doesn't have a lot of room for all the stuff you acquire. I left a lot of that behind me in Tennessee. And I had one example of every magazine that I've ever done since 1983, and sometimes multiples. And so I'd get rid of the multiples. And then one day I thought, heck with it. None of this means anything anymore. I've looked at it and spent too much time with it doing it. I don't need to see it. And I threw all but a select handful of magazines away. I half filled a big dumpster of magazines.
It hurts my heart. It hurts my heart.
Oh, I tell you. And there were some things I wished I had thrown away, but then I realized, you know what? Nobody cares. Since I've been here, nobody's ever asked me to see a magazine.
See,
anybody.
All the people I meet in my library that's getting organized. So I get, at least every other week, somebody texts me. I forgot to look for that one for that guy. Hey, you got this magazine? If I don't have an extra one that I can sell them, because I will sell and I will trade, they're like, hey, we're trying to recreate whatever from Hot Rod 1957, and I'll take pictures and send it to them to help them recreate whatever they're working on.
I love it. That is so generous. That's wonderful.
My magazine collection is so big, I've actually talked to the curator at the Lincoln, Nebraska Speedway Museum about leaving my magazines to them, because I have such a big, of course, you know, Hot Rod, they don't have anything anymore. John McGann, the current Hot Rod guy, he goes, you have more Hot Rod magazines than Hot Rod does. I'm only missing 7 issues of Hot Rod from January 1948.
That's amazing.
Steve Strope has all of them. I have the reproduction book of the first 2 years. Strope has me beat. He has all of them. So
Strope's a great guy too. Yeah, another great one. I had a lot of early Hot Rod magazines, as I said earlier. I had a ton of Road and Track, Car and Driver, and all that stuff too, because I like that. And at one point, when I was moving, I realized I had no room in the truck for anything more, so the magazine collection went out that time. And so, you know, it's just stuff. I've learned that in life today. I've given most of my favorite collectibles, some pretty cool mechanical stuff, to other people, because it's sat on my shelf long enough where I've looked at it and I don't see it anymore. It's just there. And I realize that there's people out there who love that stuff. And so to give it away is
a buddy that collected Boyd and Little John Botero stuff. When he passed away, his family let me get, like, we've got a couple billet chairs over there that a guy out of Texas paid Little John Battista to build. He used to do the cars every year.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you can't really see him on
Batura
his.
was his own
He's on his
amazing.
phone.
He's
I have one of those cars. I have a Little John lamp that he used to do a dozen lamps for his buddies. And yeah, I've got yo-yos and the spinner tops. I have all that. Yep.
You mean these two right here?
Yep. And mine are purple also. Yep.
Yep. Yep. Yep. I used to have a little car they made, but I think somebody went away with that out of my
Did
place.
you have what you gave? I don't know if I got them from you or Scott. I might have got them from Jim Dalton.
Mhm.
Billet Buckaroo dice that they were giving away at SEMA. I have red billet Buckaroo dice.
I lost those when I moved here. I had a pair, and that's everybody says that. You got a pair, don't you? Uh, I don't know what happened to those.
Dice are pretty easy to lose.
They are. They are. But oh my gosh, when we talk about, as you said, this thing feeds itself. You could keep talking forever. There's so many related stories, wonderful people, experiences that you don't know who you're with. You have no idea the kind of people that are around you. I mean, not just the kind of, but the kind people that are around us. And
So
aren't we lucky that
we're
we have that?
kind of getting ready to wrap this up. We've talked for almost 3 hours. I knew we would tonight.
Really?
So there's one guy that we have lost that was one of the biggest supporters of the industry. I want your best George Poteet story. Because you've got to have some good Poteet. Because I think you were the one that introduced us to Poteet at a show. We never got to build him a car. We were really close. We had meetings with him, but you've got to have at least one. Like Carrie does this for her work, FM3 Road Trip. They do this charity event. They drive and they go to different collections of all the people we know. Hot rod shops open up or a private museum, and then they autocross during the week. It's a non-competitive. It's like a drag week, but it's autocrossers.
Sure.
Well, George always told Hutch that worked for him, autocrossing ain't real racing because you can't die during it. That was, you can hear. We did.
That's him.
Cross in a parking lot in Memphis 2 days, and he had his guys, his Memphis Street Rod group, come out and make the homemade cobbler that he made, and cook dinner for everybody, and open the collection up. And I was sitting there, and they were talking. The one guy got up because that day, this guy in this Corvette got loose and hit a telephone pole in the parking lot, screwed up this car. So all these guys, he'd never been on this group before. He came by himself. So all these car people that they're road tripping and autocrossing are helping him order parts and next day and working on it. And they got it to the hotel, and George is sitting there and he goes, "What is he talking about? He hit a pole. That ain't real racing. How do you hit a pole?" And George, with the kindness of his heart, he goes, "If that guy doesn't get his car fixed, you tell him to come back tomorrow afternoon, and I'll let him pick one of these certain cars, and he can finish the week in my car." But the next day, they got him out and got him a ride in one of these fast autocross cars. And then George slightly changed his opinion of autocross cars. He says, still don't know if you can die during it. But he learned a little bit of respect. He was giggling like a little kid.
I love it. I love it. There's been a lot of time with George when we'd be at Des Moines and Columbus coming up with good guys. George said, "Why fly all the way back home? Why don't you ask Gary if you can just ride with me, some of his crew, and we're going to drive over there eventually." And we would hit various high points. We went on a dinner cruise with some of his friends on the Mississippi River. But as we're getting there, he expressed a side I'd never seen, that was a wonderful historian, especially Civil War history, which when you're driving across the Midwest and into the South, there's a lot of places that are pivotal in that time frame. And so he would tell you stories about it, Civil War stories, or stories about things that happened with settlers. He understood all that. He had an amazing gun collection, but it was all about Civil War. He had probably every gun that was ever used in the Civil War, plus canteens, and silver, and all kinds of things. But to me, it was always how he treated other people that separated him from anyone I've ever known. I would say, anyone I've ever met. Of course, the school that he had created in Holly Springs for girls who had been abused,
Mm-hmm.
that he funded out of pocket for a lot of girls over many years and decades. And people don't know about that because they know about his car stuff. That's one thing. But he cared more about other people. We'd be in a restaurant and he'd be talking to somebody about, how's this or that. He'd always start off a meal. You've probably seen it. And he gives the waitress $100 bill. And in one particular time, this would stand out as an high point, even though it's brief. He hands her $100 bill, and she said, "Sir, do you know that that's $100 bill?" He goes, "What do you think I am, senile?" And he said, "We're going to have a good night, and we want you to have a good night." And that's how he started it. We were at Big Buck's restaurant. You've probably been there in Michigan, and it was my turn to pay. I hate it when a guy has money that he has to pay. That's not right. Everybody should take turns paying. But generally, he indicated a lot of people put their hands in their pockets when they're with him because they'll let him pay as if he should.
Mm-hmm.
I always found that funny. But I stepped up, and it was a bar tab for, I don't know, 200, $300, something like that. And the waitress goes to George. He said, "Hey, what's the bill?" And she said, I couldn't hear it, but they were across the bar. He said, I want to pay. And she said, "Oh, it's been paid." He said, "Who?" And she's talking to him, and she's saying, "No, he told me not to say." And he said, "Who told you? Who paid it?" She pointed at me, and he gives me the wiggle with his finger, like, "Come here." He said, "You know all these guys at this meeting right here, this gathering? Everybody's a millionaire except you. Why are you paying?" I said, "George, we started like this at Sun Records in Memphis. First time we had a meal together. And I tried to pay. He said, "Why do you want to pay?" I said, "Because my dad taught me it's my turn. You paid last time, it's my turn." And this was my turn. And that was one of the things I think cemented us in that I really couldn't afford it, but I did the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was always what George did. He always did the right thing. He would ask people into those 50 by 50 tents at Columbus or Louisville, Columbus, I think, where he'd have all the grills going. Danny and his crew making hamburgers for anybody who walked in.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever thinks about that. Or how about saving the salt, about buying salt in mass and salting the surface to make it better for other racers. George has, I can't tell you of any one story that really stood out. It was just, I remember one Christmas I was divorced then. He invited my daughter Tracy and I to stay at their home in Memphis. They had a home in Holly Springs and a house in Memphis, and invited Tracy and I for the week to stay with him. Took us out on his farm and took us on a hayride with Percheron horses that his business partner raised. I remember he had a 22-hand Percheron. That's a really huge horse if you know horses. And it was a stud horse. And we went out with some others, went around the properties with it, and they treated Tracy like their own daughter. I still have pictures of them. We're riding horses with George.
Mm-hmm.
And he reached out to me in ways that nobody ever has. And he was super generous, and he never had pomp about him. He tried to buy me a Z06 Corvette, an 06 Z06 in 06 at a dealer in Memphis. We went to the dealer, and we were there with his girlfriend getting her a car because I don't know what the deal was. And he said, "Why don't you go drive that Z06, see what you think?" Well, knowing George, I thought, nope, ain't going to do it. Because if you recall, when I was at Indy and I was going through my divorce, he asked me how my 62 wagon project was coming. I said, "It isn't." He goes, "Yeah, I know. I'm building you one on a permanent level." He gave me a killer grandma style dog dish capped seafoam green Chevy wagon.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's ever done that.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave him my dad's 1860 muzzle loader rifle, which he prized and told me many a time that he'd be sitting at his desk rubbing the stock with his hand, getting oil on it, keeping it perfect. And yeah, there's George was just a good friend. There was no real singular spot, but I've known a lot of people. I've never known anybody like George.
Yeah.
So many. Generosity was his middle name.
Yeah, we have a story that Carrie used to coach cheerleading for underprivileged girls out of Nashville, and they qualified for Vegas. They were trying to raise money. Well, Bobby Alloway at that time was coaching his daughter's softball, so he would talk coach stuff with Carrie. So then one day Poteet calls and tell us about these girls, what they've been doing. He wanted to make sure they were trying to raise the money because these girls, they had to scrape for money for $7 for practice. Going to Vegas for finals was like going to the moon. And George sent some money 2 days after Carrie. He says, give me a number on this. And there was a FedEx check for those girls to go to Vegas.
How about that?
Yeah, we both know stories of like that, let alone the car stuff that he's did. But yeah, so.
I remember two people came in to take the tour in Honest Charlie. And they said, we're from Holly Springs. Well, they knew who I was. They'd already been prepped. I said, Holly Springs, you know George. Oh, yeah, we know George. We just bought his either the hardtop or the Sunliner with the overhead cam motor. Bobby built both cars. They were identical, except one was a convertible. And they were George's banker in Holly Springs. They owned a bank. They were just simple, nice folks, just as cool as can be. And they couldn't afford that car. So in ways he had done before, he asked them what would be the good price. And they gave him a number, and he goes, that's fine. You know, took a huge loss, didn't care, gave away a car that was one of the best, that's probably the nicest Galaxy ever built.
Yep.
But that was, you know, there's people out there who give, and there's people out there who give more, who love, and he loved people.
Yep.
He was tremendous, and everybody that knows him would agree.
Yep, it's true.
I'm lucky to have known him, and I'm lucky to have known you guys, many people in this industry that we were lucky enough to be a part of, and I'll forever be thankful. I appreciate it.
Anything else more for him, Carrie? You just kind of sat there and just listened to him.
I know, it's been a good listening session.
Yeah.
But she has more important things to offer than you or I, Tim. And I wish I could hear more of your stories because there's so many, and you've always been the most genteel person, Carrie. You don't try to stand out. I'm glad that I was able.
Sometimes she's like that scene, if you've seen the Buddy the Elf movie, where when he's going into the town to find his dad and he's trying to hug that raccoon. Sometimes she's the raccoon, and sometimes I just want to hug. Yeah.
He needs his butt kicked there, Carrie. I think he needs butt kicking.
I say I don't like event Carrie because, you know, at events there's stuff and the stress of putting on events. People that don't help on have no idea what it takes to put on. So yeah, I know.
Even some people that do put on events don't know what it takes to put on an event.
Well,
I think I know what you mean.
We should wrap this up. So again, we're going to try to get Rob Canan and do a separate interview, and then we'll try to put it all together and have you two come on together and tell some good working at Hot Rod magazines and some more Cadzilla stories. So
I would very much look forward to that, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity you've given me tonight. It's been great. I hope we've been able to entertain some folks, but moreover, I think to give people the understanding of what it's really about. And it's just giving, creating, loving, the friendships we build, and those things will go on long after the cars are gone. And I'm so thankful that you are my friends. I appreciate it.
We want to thank you for being a guest on the Strange Motion Way podcast. And we want to thank you for everything you've done for our career. And we don't say this to everybody when we sign off, but we love you, Steve.
Love you, Steve.
And I love you, Tim and Carrie, very much. Your family.
Hey, welders, ready to upgrade your gear and save some serious dough in the process? The Miller Build with Blue Savings and Rebate Program has you covered. Find amazing deals and cashback rebates on a wide range of Miller products, from welders to plasma cutters and everything in between, all backed by our 3-year warranty. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take advantage of the Miller Build with Blue program now. Visit us online or stop by your nearest Miller distributor today to start saving.